high possibility that Trump has advantage to win the election. So, of course, which factor is the most important to win the election? In this case, it is not easy to say, but the most important part is image. The life is improving, security is improving, everything, the image of the improving affects the result. So that's why the life is improving or security situation is improving. Improving creates something, the dream. So that's why the people will vote for the improving situation. So last 4 years, situation hasn't improved. Both security, economy, both in this case. So that's why, view from this situation, there's a high possibility that the opposition can get the advantage, and this means that Trump will win, I believe.
Okay, let's go back across to our other guests. Ambassador Sajanar, let me quickly draw you back in here. As far as, of course, now India is concerned, what do you believe would be the Indian viewpoint on this US presidential polls? Who would be a better friend of India? How changed or unchanged would the US-India policy be depending on the outcome and the result of these polls?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, Uday. And what I feel is that India finds itself in a particularly sweet spot. You know what Mr. Keith Vaz has mentioned about the importance that the results of the elections have for the United States, or for that matter, as far as Australia is concerned, it's an ally, it's an alliance partner, etc. So, for them, it's very, very significant. As far as India is concerned, I think we are in a particularly good spot because, if you look at the last 20 plus years, irrespective of whichever party has occupied the White House, relations between India and the United States have continued to grow. So I think that there is a structural convergence as far as India and the United States are concerned in terms of the convergence in their interests. On the value systems, of course, there has been a convergence in the past. Both are democracies, pluralistic societies, freedom of religion, media, etc., etc. But in recent years, particularly over the last 20 years, I think it is also the convergence of interest that has brought these countries together. And that is the binding factor. Of course, if you look at the two leaders, there will be different aspects. We've spoken about trade. We know that as far as Mr. Trump is concerned, if he were to come to power, there would be that focus on trade, which we experienced even in his first term. He had imposed penal tariffs on exports of Indian aluminium, steel, etc. He removed about $6 billion worth of our exports from the generalized system of preferences. He was particularly insistent on reduction of tariffs on export of Harley Davidson motorbikes from the United States to India. So I think those are aspects, and he's mentioned also that, India is a tariff king. Of course, we don't, and I definitely don't agree with that particular classification. But, this is the impression that he has. So I think tariff is going to be a particular element that is going to receive focus. And as far as Kamala Harris is concerned, we might get something like, some sort of a pushback on what they call, a democratic backsliding. But we have seen our panelists today, what they have, their views as far as the state of the US democracy is concerned. I think the United States itself has much to answer for, rather than sort of, pointing fingers at others. So I think that is a dialogue that, if it comes up, it will happen on the sidelines. The point I want to make is that the main body of the partnership between India and the United States, whether it is in the area of defense, it is in the area of transfer of technology, semiconductors, what we've been talking about, G414 engines, on Indo-Pacific, on the Quad, on, push back against the expansionist policies of China, etc. I think those are elements that are going to stay. Last point that, because there are, most of the
Yes.
panelists
Yes.
are out of India. The last
Yes.
point that I would like to make here is, many people seem to think that it is the glue of China. Both the countries have problems with China, that brings them together. China might be one element. It is not the whole picture.
Okay.
The whole picture is very, very different. China is one of them, and that brings us. But I
Okay.
think, as I
Let me
mentioned,
quickly
defense
take that to
technology.
Joyita Basu as well on the Indian perspective on the US elections. Who would be a better friend for India in the White House, Joyita? Also, on the very important question about the new occupant of the White House's position on the conflict as well. Is that likely to change, be it of course the Gaza conflict or the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
First of all, Uday, as Indians, or in fact in this particular case the Indian diplomatic establishment, Indian government cannot afford to say that this candidate is better than that. I mean, whoever is winning, whoever will win, we have to deal with that person. At the same time, what we have to remember is that when we look at how the US administration functions, many of their departments, particularly State Department in particular, works in silos. So, a lot of this, I would say, I am going to call it nonsense that is coming from the US about India's democratic backsliding, which is an utter lie. That is coming primarily from the kind of people that are there in the State Department. If you look at, even for that matter, the Biden agreement, you remember that January 2023, that critical technology, that ISET agreement that happened and all. So, the pushback for that was coming from State Department, which did not want it to be implemented. Defense Department wanted it to be implemented. So, finally, ultimately what happened, that National Security Council at the level of NSA and all, at the level of the president, it was sorted out. So, you see, the perception here is that, the belief here is that irrespective of whatever these departments, they try to enforce their own agenda on US government policy. If you have the president's core team with you, then you can ignore the rest of them. Now, the problem is that, you see, what sort of a core team, we have a fairly good idea of how Trump's team will be. What sort of a team is Harris going to bring in? You see, this is because there is a talk that Harris is too left for anybody's comfort, too liberal, which is another name for Marxist actually. So, what sort of a team is she bringing in? So, you see, those things will matter, will come into the play at that time, but I am certain our diplomats are, I would say, I mean, they know how to maneuver these waters and they will maneuver it. So, now this comes to the, when you are talking about that part. So, we have to handle whatever the situation, we have to handle it. Now, you are talking about the war part. You see what is going to happen. Well, I do not know whether Donald Trump can end the Russia-Ukraine war, which is going to be 3 years in February, inside 24 hours. I have my doubts about it, but yes, definitely what is going to happen is that he is going to cut off the funding Ukraine, because there is a strong, and let us not forget, one of the things that is giving Trump a push, that is, there is a belief that he is a no war president. All right, and there is a belief that Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, they are going, they want America pushed into war, basically of the defense established, whatever be the reasons. So, there is this belief that Trump is a no war president, that is really working in his favor. Whether it is right or wrong, we do not know as yet. Now, so I really do not know whether he can stop the war inside 24 hours. As for the Israel-Gaza, Israel-Hamas and Israel-Iran, that is very interesting, because you see, there is a distinct feeling in Israel, and a lot of people I have been talking to. The thing is that they want Trump, because you see, there is a strong feeling. What is happening? There is just a story that has come out, that the Biden-Harris administration, they are posing hindrances, they are erecting hindrances for supplying certain defense stuff to material, I would say, to Israel. Apparently, there is a shortfall of bullets, and that supply, I mean, whatever they were getting from the US and all. So, Biden and Harris, they have been working actively, Israelis say, to hobble Israel. Okay, I mean, overall, of course, they have to be, they have sent in their B-52 bombers,
Yes.
and all these things. But there is apparently, I mean, that is what, as I said, the Israelis say, they are removing sanctions on Iran, which is basically helping funding Iran, which ultimately will go into using them for their proxies against Israel, the 7 proxies that they have. So, you see, now that is a very tricky thing. Now, if Trump comes in, there is going to be full on support for Israel. I think there will be lots of sanctions on Iran, but I am not so certain which way Kamala will go, because if you remember, Kamala Harris walked out of Netanyahu's speech, then they have been pushing back on the Rafah, and the Israelis are extremely upset about it.
Okay. Fair enough. Let me quickly go back across to Ben Harris on, of course, since Ben, you have spent time in Moscow. What do you believe the new US occupant of the White House, or this presidential election result, what bearing is it going to have on the US's position vis-a-vis the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and also the Gaza war and the war, of course, now in the Middle East?
Well, as for Ukraine, as I said before, that Trump has said he'll end the war straight away, and we've been seeing a growing amount of Ukraine fatigue, that the support that the States is giving, in particular to Ukraine, has been dwindling, that funding ran out completely in January and left this catastrophic hole in Ukraine's air defense when they ran out of Patriots. And Russia has destroyed half the heating system in the meantime. Finally, in April, there was a $61 billion package passed by Congress in order to stop basically Ukraine being defeated. Trouble is that money is still not coming. Zelensky said just last week that he's received only 10% of the money that was promised in April, $6 billion. And that's simply not enough. I mean, Ukraine is running a deficit of $3.5 billion a month. And if they don't get any more money, then they're going to have to capitulate. As for Harris, she's indicated, she hasn't been very concrete, but she's indicated basically that she's going to continue Biden's program with supporting Ukraine and supplying it with arms and money. However, again, as I say, the Ukraine fatigue is such that I think under Harris that she will also draw back and wind down the amount of support, because already the load has shifted to Europe, who's increasingly picking up both the financial and the military strain. In particular, the States is no longer sending weapons from its stockpiles, in particular the air defense missiles. And these are increasingly coming from Europe. And the plan now, I think, and Harris will definitely push this, is rather than giving Ukraine weapons from NATO stockpiles, they're going to build factories so that Ukraine can manufacture its own. But the problem with that is time. I mean, these factories will take at least 1 or 2 years to come online, and Ukraine is on the front line. It's in defeat. So I'm not sure they have that much time. So I think the outlook for the Ukraine war is pretty bleak. I think they can struggle on. Under Harris, it'll be much easier for maybe another year, but they are at the moment in retreat and facing defeat. And there's been talk of ceasefire deals again. How we get from here to there is going to be very difficult. But as I say, I think either of the presidents, be it Harris, be it Trump, will continue this withdrawal, this pullback. As for the Middle East, I'm much less qualified to comment on that. But my understanding of it is that Israel has the US's full support, full backing, as much money, as much arms as it wants, and it will continue to get that. However, the States, the White House is obviously very unhappy and wants to avoid a wider war, regional war at all costs, in particular taking out Iranian oil refineries and oil production, because that would cause international energy markets to spike, oil prices to spike. And I think all said and done, regardless of the security commitments, I think the number one concern of the White House is to keep a cap on oil prices. And so they will work very hard to rein in Netanyahu, or at least limit him, and so that he doesn't cause any damage to the energy infrastructure in the region. That's their main priority.
Okay. Keith Vaz, quickly coming to you as well on this point of, what bearing do you believe also, the positions on the war will have on the voter in the United States of America, given the, the kind of extent of the conflicts and also, of course, the media headlines that the conflicts have generated?
For the elector, the issue is what's happening to your taxpayers' money. And this is where Trump has been able to get right through to the elector. Why are we spending taxpayers' money on supporting another country? And this is something that really was important in the UK elections, and I think in the French elections before that. The fact is, how much can the taxpayer bear of this expenditure in order to support a cause? And that is where I think that is getting through to the electorate all over the world. I think we're living in a time of incredible poverty. Cost of living crisis is affecting every country in the world. And ordinary people, and they are the people who vote, they have the chance to put this right in an election. So obviously, we want to, I don't think any of us on this program want to continue with wars for the sake of wars or for causes that are not supported. In the end, these countries will have to go and rebuild Ukraine. When Ukraine is destroyed after this war, as it will be, because it's being pummeled every day, somebody will have to go in and spend the money, the dollars, in order to make sure it's rebuilt. So it's a cycle that will continue to go on and on and on. I think the Middle East is more complicated because I think the two parties are very similar in their approach. They're both supportive of Israel. I don't think that there will be much change. I think Trump has overcome his upset with Netanyahu, that Netanyahu congratulated Biden after the last election before all the legal proceedings were completed. I don't think American politicians can do anything but support Israel because of the very, very strong lobby and the very strong relationship they have with it. But I think Ukraine is different. And of course, as we know, Trump has form on this. So that will get through to the electorate. Do they want to have that money invested in Detroit, or do they want to spend it in Kyiv? These are the issues, I think, that will ultimately influence the way in which this election occurs. But whoever comes in, big foreign policy implications. I think relations with Russia will improve if Trump gets in. I think relations with China will get worse. I think that in terms of India, since this was raised by the ambassador, I think probably Modi gets on better with Trump than he does with any other American leader. They certainly seem to gel. They're both populist, charismatic leaders. And, you know, I think they've got this synergy. Certainly, I wasn't at the meetings, but from what I saw, when they both visited their respective countries, there was something going on there that I think will continue.
Okay,
but I think that these are big issues as far as war and peace is concerned.
Point taken. Charles Thompson, what about the Australian perspective? What is Australia looking at? How is Australia looking at this US election? Who would be a better friend for Australia? What impact will this have on groupings like the Quad? And also, what about the China perspective as well?
Wow. Well, it depends which side of politics you're on to answer that question. So what I find fascinating too is over many years, if we went back many years ago, on the left side of politics, the migrants communities were very much involved with their politicians and everything. But on the right side of politics, it wasn't there. But now, if you're talking present day, whether it's Australia or the United States, there's many very highly educated, very wealthy Indians who are now quietly behind the scenes in the Republicans and in the Conservatives in Australia. And the thing that I hear time and time again from my Indian friends in Australia is the one thing that attracts them to Trump is the idea that he's not for wars. And this is the big ticket item that I hear from them. My only request to India would be, get your embassies, get your consulates to use more soft power and get out there and do more soft power with your culture, because there is, whether it's the United States or whether it's Australia, there's a huge, very wealthy, highly educated Indian community who want to connect both countries.
All right. Let's leave it at that. Appreciate. Okay, I'll give the last word to Dr. Satoru Nagawa. I have just a couple of minutes left. So, Dr. Nagawa, I'm going to give you the last word. on, of course, your way forward for the US vis-a-vis their foreign policy, what changes will happen depending on which way this election goes. And also, I'd like you to address the China question. How is China viewing this election? Who would be a more difficult person to deal with for China, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
Okay, we should remember what happened last 4 years. The United States failed to deter the war initiated by Russia or initiated by other rivals against the United States. And because of this, U.S. allies, including Israel or other countries, cannot rely on the United States. So that's why the people start to talk about the multipolar world instead of the Pax Americana. So United States need to recover the image of the strong United States. So under the same government, it is not the easy task, I believe. So completely change is needed. In this case, which one has the advantage? I believe the Republican has the advantage because the current government is not Republican. That is my analysis in short. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Yes, Joyita wants to quickly comment.
I want to make a quick point. One of the biggest drawbacks of Harris is that she was part of the administration for 4 years. And whatever Joe Biden's problems were,
Yes.
whatever misgovernance or good actually the problem is the misgovernance part is sticking with her.
Okay.
So that could also be our deciding factor.
Okay. My thanks to all of our guests for joining us on this discussion. It's time for a very short break.
अगर आप बनना चाहते हैं एंकर या फिर आप में है जुनून एक तेज तर्रार न्यूज रिपोर्टर बनने का, तो आप ज्वाइन करें ITV और इंडिया न्यूज़ का मीडिया स्कूल। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का कोर्स आपको मौका देता है देश के दिग्गज एंकर्स के साथ काम करने का। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल में आप बेहद नजदीकी से देख पाएंगे किस तरह से ITV नेटवर्क के दिग्गज पत्रकारों की टीम दिन रात खबरों पर काम करती है। इस कोर्स के दौरान आप सीखेंगे एंकरिंग की एक एक बारीकी उन एंकर्स के साथ जो देश को रखते हैं हर खबर से बाखबर। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का ये कोर्स आपके एंकरिंग स्किल्स को करेगा इतना सशक्त मजबूत जिससे आप बनेंगे पत्रकारिता की दुनिया का वो चमकता चेहरा जो दुनिया देखेगी और पसंद करेगी।
The 2024 US presidential elections are down to the wire. Newsx reports from Ground Zero.
Hello, I'm Hiral Sachde reporting from New York. Watch me on Newsx as I bring you all the latest updates in the run-up to the US presidential elections.
Watch the US presidential elections 2024 only on Newsx.
अगर आप बनना चाहते हैं एंकर या फिर आप में है जुनून एक तेज तर्रार न्यूज रिपोर्टर बनने का, तो आप ज्वाइन करें ITV और इंडिया न्यूज़ का मीडिया स्कूल। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का कोर्स आपको मौका देता है देश के दिग्गज एंकर्स के साथ काम करने का। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल में आप बेहद नजदीकी से देख पाएंगे किस तरह से ITV नेटवर्क के दिग्गज पत्रकारों की टीम दिन रात खबरों पर काम करती है। इस कोर्स के दौरान आप सीखेंगे एंकरिंग की एक एक बारीकी उन एंकर्स के साथ जो देश को रखते हैं हर खबर से बाखबर। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का ये कोर्स आपके एंकरिंग स्किल्स को करेगा इतना सशक्त मजबूत जिससे आप बनेंगे पत्रकारिता की दुनिया का वो चमकता चेहरा जो दुनिया देखेगी और पसंद करेगी। अगर आप बनना चाहते हैं एंकर या फिर आप में है जुनून एक तेज तर्रार न्यूज रिपोर्टर बनने का, तो आप ज्वाइन करें ITV और इंडिया न्यूज़ का मीडिया स्कूल। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का कोर्स आपको मौका देता है देश के दिग्गज एंकर्स के साथ काम करने का। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल में आप बेहद नजदीकी से देख पाएंगे किस तरह से ITV नेटवर्क के दिग्गज पत्रकारों की टीम दिन रात खबरों पर काम करती है। इस कोर्स के दौरान आप सीखेंगे एंकरिंग की एक एक बारीकी उन एंकर्स के साथ जो देश को रखते हैं हर खबर से बाखबर। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का ये कोर्स आपके एंकरिंग स्किल्स को करेगा इतना सशक्त, मजबूत, जिससे आप बनेंगे पत्रकारिता की दुनिया का वो चमकता चेहरा जो दुनिया देखेगी और पसंद करेगी।
The US presidential elections 2024.
We are in the final lap of the United States elections, and the pulse of the voters is all that matters now.
We are at Bryant Park in New York City, and as you can see, this place is extremely crowded with a lot of people. Who do you think is a better president?
They're both terrible, but I guess Trump had a better economy.
Trump, on the other hand, is going to be in Wisconsin and North Carolina, and then he's going to be back in Wisconsin on Friday.
Well, I don't think Trump really has a clue what he would do as president.
Kamala Harris is leading in the national polls right now, but by less than a point.
Pennsylvania is the most important state.
Newsx has got you covered. Road to 270 only on Newsx. The US presidential elections 2024.
Very, very slight. Hello and welcome. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. You're joining us on Newsx. We are, of course, continuing to build up to the United States presidential elections. American voters will face a clear choice for president on the 5th of November between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Till now, it seems the race is toe-to-toe, essentially even. But as we await the climax, it appears to be hurtling towards a photo finish. In the heart of this lies 7 battleground states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. These battleground states are characterized by their unpredictable voting patterns, often switching between Democratic and Republican candidates. These states often have a mix of Democratic groups, varied economic interests and differing cultural attitudes, leading to fluctuating voter preferences from one election to the next. The final set of pollsters by the New York Times and Siena College finding Vice President Kamala Harris showing new strength in North Carolina and Georgia as former President Donald Trump erases her lead in Pennsylvania. The polls show that Harris is now narrowly ahead in Nevada and Wisconsin, while Trump leads in Arizona. The polls also show them locked in close races in Michigan, Georgia, as well as Pennsylvania. But the results in all 7 swing states are within the margin of sampling error, meaning neither candidate has a definitive lead in any of them. Both candidates have multiple pathways available to capture the 270 electoral college votes required to claim victory, assuming that polls are not dramatically underestimating the support for one or the other. In such a close race, then, even a small systemic poll finding or error could tip the contest decisively in either direction. These figures come as more than 70 million Americans have already cast an early ballot. But remember, the tightly contested landscape remains means the race remains highly uncertain as the campaign enters its final hours. On that note, let's take a quick look at the latest set of predictions by different pollsters. So let's quickly show you what different pollsters are saying on the US presidential polls 2024. What is the latest survey findings for who's leading and who's trailing? So this is what the New York Times Siena poll says currently. They are giving a slight edge to Kamala Harris, but as you can see, it's very tight, neck to neck, 49% in favor of Harris, 48% in favor of Donald Trump. Let's tell you now what ABC News and the Ipsos poll are saying. Well, they're also giving a very slight edge to Kamala Harris, but it's neck to neck, 49% in favor of Harris, 48% in favor of Donald Trump is what ABC News and Ipsos poll is saying. NBC polls is right now completely undecided, predicting a dead heat between Harris and Trump, giving them both equal percentages, 49% in favor of Harris and 49% in Donald Trump. So they're tied as far as that NBC poll is concerned. Let's tell you now about the Atlas National polls. Well, that's again giving it very, very close, of course, prediction, but it's slightly in favor of Donald Trump there. He's at 49% vis-a-vis 47.2% to Harris. So over a 1.5% lead for him according to that poll. Let's tell you about what the 270 to win poll now is saying. This is also predicting that it's very tight between the two. They're giving a slight edge, very slight of course, to Kamala Harris at 48.3%. and Donald Trump stands at 47.3% according to them. Let's tell you now about the Patriot polling poll. Well, the Patriot polling poll is also saying it's very, very close. They are also giving a slight edge to Kamala Harris at 49.4% for Harris and 48.1% for Donald Trump. So again, just over 1% there. Let's tell you now about the Des Moines Register and the Mediacom Iowa poll. This is, of course, for the predicted swing state of Iowa. Remember, Iowa, of course, is one of the swing states. So according to that poll, Kamala Harris has the slight edge in Iowa than Donald Trump. But remember, many other swing states, Donald Trump is also projected to be ahead. So it's very, very close, of course, right now. As far as, of course, these polls are concerned, dead heat predicted for most of them. Remember, they all have sampling errors of about 1 or 2%. And, of course, the difference is between 1 or 2%. So it could go either way. Joining us live at this point to decode this is Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, former diplomat. We also have Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist, joining us live. Nicholas Nugent, senior journalist, also joins us live. Sajid Tarar, US Pakistan businessman, is also live with us. Also, Sampath Shivangi, President, Indian American Forum for Political Education, is joining us live. Vaya Lavad, senior journalist, also joins the broadcast. Let me make a start with you first, Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. These polls are very, very close. However, we have seen exit polls go wrong in India in the recent past, in Lok Sabha elections, and also, of course, more recently in the Haryana State Assembly poll. So these exit polls could go wrong. And as I was telling our viewers earlier, Ambassador Kapoor, they all have error margins of 1 or 2%. And the difference is 1 to 2% in all of them. So it's really down to the wire, isn't it? Can exit polls, predict things accurately? What's your sense, Ambassador Kapoor, when you look at these findings? Gautam Mukherjee, why don't you take that? I believe Ambassador Kapoor, we're having a technical error with his connection. Yes, Gautam Mukherjee, why don't you take that?
Uday, the polls are actually, impossible to decipher who's going to win. But it reminds me of an election long ago between JFK and Nixon. And JFK won by a handful of votes, finally. So something like that is likely. Let us just hope that after the polls, whoever is the winner is not mired in controversy with the other person challenging him, because unlike in India, where a poll decision is final, and yes, they go to the election commission and make a fuss about the electronic voting machines and the like, but the winner is declared, and there is very little controversy allowed in that matter. But in America, this has been going on. George W. Bush and the Chad issue with Gore, that was also, to date, people don't really know if George W. Bush won his first election fair and square, or by virtue of a stacked Supreme Court, which was in favor of the Republicans and his family and so on, and the former president who was his father, that sort of thing. Which, it's a little surprising for, if you like, the greatest democracy in the world. I mean, America is meant to be the arbiter of democracy. And yet when it comes down to it, it does some pretty, odd cloak and dagger stuff. Who's going to win? We don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. As far as India is concerned, if Trump wins, it's going to be a more clear-cut relationship, even though he's going to pressure India on tariffs, on visas, on a number of things like that. But he is clear-cut in terms of his attitude towards India, which is positive. He is also likely to bring both the wars to a close by using the might of the United States, despite, I'm sure, the opposite view from the arms lobby in America, which is making a lot of money from both these wars. If Harris wins, it's a little worrisome for India, because of late the Biden administration has been letting certain elements in America bait India over Khalistan. They're backing Canada over their spurious comments and remarks. And they have recently also put some sanctions on a number of Indian companies which have been dealing with Russia. So this is a little worrisome in terms of so-called strategic relationship between India and America. Will Harris continue? She will continue by and large the Biden policies, though at this point in time to write her off as a clone is probably wrong. When she comes into her own, we shall see what we shall see. Uday.
Okay, let me get in some breaking inputs coming in this hour ahead of the result to the high-stake U.S. election. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump is slated to hold 4 mega rallies in the swing states of Pennsylvania and Michigan. So these are the big breaking developments coming in. Donald Trump will be concentrating in the swing states of Pennsylvania and Michigan. He's slated to hold 2 mega rallies in these states ahead of polling tomorrow. Let me join Nicholas Nugent for his perspective on that. Nicholas, the swing states is what is crucial. Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, concentrating on Pennsylvania and Michigan in the last 24 hours before polling.
Agree, as has already been said, it's quite clear this election will be won or lost in those 7 key states, which is why both the candidates have been focusing on those 7 key states and also the media and reporting them. And the conclusions that you've already presented to us from the polling makes it quite clear that even in those 7 states, things will be neck and neck, very close indeed. And I'm certainly in no position to make any predictions. Indeed, the pollsters themselves are in no position to make any pollsters. But may I add to what Gautam Mukherjee said? It's the process I'm interested in. It's the process. Does the election go smoothly in this model democracy, supposedly? So will the election take place? Will there be challenges to it? Because, as you've already pointed out, in both India and indeed Britain, polling this year has been very smooth, and the change of government has been almost immediate. But in America, we have that additional worry that you have a 2.5-month gap before the new president will take office. And that's the bit I worry about. And I only have to mention the date, the 6th of January, for you to know what I'm talking about. Will there be challenges? Will there be challenges through the courts? Will there be challenges outside the courts? That's really a worrying thing, particularly if Kamala Harris wins, because Mr. Trump has shown previously his ability to challenge a result that doesn't go in his way. So that's my worry. This will not be home and dried by the end of tomorrow by a long shot. It may take a little longer than that for us to know who the nominal winner is. No, not the nominal winner, the winner is. And then we have to worry about the long period before the transition takes place. Will that be peaceful? And then we can start worrying about the impact on foreign policy, which of course is at the back of my mind, but I'm not in a position to make predictions, so I'm not going to talk about who's going to win. We outsiders have no influence whatsoever. But of course, we are worried about, we are concerned about, I think I will say, changes in foreign policy, particularly in my case, being based in Europe, about the new president's attitude towards defense alliances. I wish I shared Gautam Mukherjee's confidence that a Trump presidency would end the two prevailing wars quite swiftly. I'm not so confident about that, but clearly those two wars are a key factor. The war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, are key factors which we're all waiting to see how the new presidency responds to those. Those are my concerns.
Yes. Okay, let me quickly take that across to you, Sajid Tarar, on, of course, these polls as well. What do you make of how close they are? How accurate are they? Are they to be trusted, the exit polls, the surveys, or are you taking them with a pinch of salt? Mr. Sajid Tarar, can you hear me? Okay, I think we've lost his connection, unfortunately. Let me quickly get in Sampath Shivangi. Sampath Shivangi, what do you make of the exit polls predicting things have gone down to the wire? How accurate are these surveys going to be according to you?
Yeah, I think we knew right from the day one, it won't be easy exit for either one of the candidates. I think President Trump is actually campaigning, and Kamala Harris has not let her campaign down. So I think it's going to be the toughest fight of the century, probably. But the previous speaker was mentioning that if President Trump loses, he may challenge again. But the only difference I can say to the audience is when he did 4 years ago, when he lost the election with President Biden, he was president. He was president for 2.5 months more than on the day of the election. So he could challenge many ways because he was in full power. But at this time, he's not a president. I don't think if something happens, he may question. I don't know whether he will challenge to the extent he did in about 4 years ago. I just want to make that one very clear. And I think we'll have to wait and see. I think Miss Harris is getting stronger every day. But we have almost 24 hours. Wait and see.
Absolutely. Dr. Awad, let me quickly draw you in here. Dr. Awad, what is going to be the X factor and how accurate are these surveys? Are they to be believed, or are you taking them with a pinch of salt? And what do you believe is going to ultimately sway the swing states in favor of one candidate? Because those swing states hold the key to the White House, don't they?
Well, if we look at the American trends, which with the survey showing that, we can see that slightly that Harris is edging ahead of Trump in most of the surveys and the national survey carried out in the United States. But as you said, and as the previous distinguished guests have said that it could be the swinging states which can be a major role to play in any outcome of this election. Because here there will be the minority votes will play a major role in swinging, and you know that we could see that Trump and Kamala Harris trying to woo the minorities, especially the Muslim voters, which they constitute around 3.5 million voters registered. There are 5 million in total, but these are the registered voters, and especially in those swinging states where their votes could really play the major role in changing and giving the upper hand to the winner. But I would say that it's a time for the United States, and I don't know how many would be of in my agreement. It's the time that they should have a third party, because there is no question. There are always either this or this. So we don't know where is the American democracy is really heading for. And I think a third party should emerge in the near future. Otherwise, we may see some kind of turbulence in the United States, because Trump may not be happy to see Harris winning, because the conspiracy theory will be there. How much they will control the street in the United States, as our colleague said on the 6th of Jan, I think these are issues to be watched closely. But in terms of the swinging and the election, I believe that Harris is still having the edge. But if Harris also lose this election, we have to see that she has joined the election quite late because of the reluctance of Biden of not pulling out of this election. So there are lots of pros and cons to look into the American election. And I think the survey usually and the outcome of these exit poll come closer to the candidate who is going to win.
All right. All right. Yes. Dr. Awad, stay with us. Let me quickly draw back in Gautam Mukherjee now for an Indian perspective. Gautam Mukherjee, what's the Indian view on these elections? Who would be a better friend of India in the White House? How should India and Indians be viewing these polls and the results?
Well, as it stands, Uday, as I've said earlier, it appears to be Trump who will be closer and friendlier towards India. But we don't know a great deal about Harris. When you're a vice president, you're a stand-in, and hardly anything is known about any of the vice presidents unless they emerge into the presidency. Insofar as she's been campaigning, she's been very careful to keep the powder dry, not say anything controversial, and she's only been doing it for 3 months. To give her a fair chance is probably the best course. She is part Indian, for whatever that may count for. Whether she is aware of India or not is difficult to say, because, unlike Trump, who put out a Diwali message, she did not. Trump has met Modi many times. Harris hasn't. I don't think she's even met him once. So we have to see what will be Harris's attitude. She, of course, will come out of the shadow of Joe Biden, but this may take a few months because, in the American system, the entire bureaucracy is also changed. Unlike in India, where we have a permanent bureaucracy like Britain, she's going to, the West Wing, as the famous serial goes, is completely changed. And that's going to take a few months to put in her own people. How many people is she going to draw from the Biden administration? How many from other Democrats? There may be a smattering of Republicans. Some of them do that as well. We don't really know a great deal about her political leanings. She hasn't written books that give us a clue. Most aspiring presidents do write books. I don't think she's more or less an accidental, candidate that may become president because of Biden's advanced age and going a bit senile. So let us wait and see. As far as ageism goes, we know Trump is, I think, 78. So he's also given to, drifting here and there while he's speaking. Whether he will be focused throughout his 4 years remains to be seen. From the Indian perspective, we are hoping, I'm sure all Indians are hoping that this strategic relationship that has been much talked of, the Quad, the various military maneuvers that are conducted with various Western powers as well as Asian powers will continue. The attitude to use India as a bulwark against China will continue. China plus one will continue. So this, we are hoping, will continue, whether it's Trump or whether it's Harris. So, and the other point is, again, the vice presidents, will they play a role? Both the vice presidents are new kids on the block in a sense. Of course, they were governors of states. But again, we don't know a great deal about their attitudes on the international, platform. So at the present moment, there's no need, I feel, as an Indian, to be, lean too much one way or the other. Both could be quite beneficial for India once they get into office. Uday.
Yes, Sampat Shivangi wants to quickly respond. Sampat Shivangi, of course, is from the Indian diaspora there in the US. Please go ahead.
I'm also Indian American. I'm here for 48 years.
Absolutely. And you're, of course, also you're a post holder on the Indian American Forum yourself. Absolutely, you're the president of that. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. I just want to add to the previous speaker that Prime Minister Modi has met in the White House twice. Once he took office about 3.5 years ago when he came to US, and he was here last year in the fall, and I was there at the. She hosted a lunch for Prime Minister Modi in the State Department with the Anthony Blinken, the State Secretary of State, and Ms. Harris both hosted a lunch for Prime Minister Modi. I did not see. Actually, the first time he met 3.5 years ago.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, when Prime Minister addressed the House, the Congress in the United States, Kamala Harris was sitting right behind him when he was addressing the House, if I'm not mistaken.
We had a meeting in the White House with President Biden, and in a separate room, she met with Prime Minister Modi. Prime Minister Modi almost begged her to come to India in the 4-year term of as vice president. She never showed up to India. She went all over the world except India. And actually, we had there was a lunch about 8 months ago in the State Department. Prime Minister Modi and her, they were sitting together, and we discussed about 2 hours the pros and cons of India-US relation, but never had anything, happened bonami in a sense. They never had the best of the relations. That's what is my feeling, sitting there as one of the guests on the invitation. So just to correct it, they know each other very well, Prime Minister Modi and Ms. Harris. But see, the only thing I want to say, why she does not want to be openly friendly with India, because she says she's Indian, Indian heritage or Indian, she will lose most of the Black American votes or African American votes. When I wrote an article that she is Indian heritage, she is partly Indian, and I got a threat on the phone calls saying, how dare you say she is Indian, she is a Black American, she is African American, we want her to stay. So I just stayed away from saying who she is. I just want to make sure the audience know Prime Minister Modi has met Kamala Harris several times.
Yeah, okay. So you wanted to clarify that. Yeah, a fact check Gautam's statement. Fair enough. Also, of course, the fact is that, Donald Trump has taken jibes on this issue. on Kamala Harris. He did come out and say one day we thought she's Indian, the next day we think we get to know she's African American. So yes, he has also taken a jibe on her for this. But let me quickly bring in now Dr. Awad back on the issue of the conflicts in the Middle East and also the Russia-Ukraine conflict. What bearing will that have on the election, according to you, Dr. Awad, and the stance that the two candidates have taken? And depending on the verdict of these elections, what impact will there be on these two conflicts and the positions of the White House?
Well, I think if for India, as I'm listening to my Indian friends, it makes no difference whether it's the president or the vice president. One of them will be in office. They will have a leverage on the White House. But for Arabs, for the Middle East, we don't have much of a choices because between Harris and Trump, there is not much of a difference. The only difference that both of them Harris wanted to stop the war, but none of them wanted to tell Israel to stop this war. So therefore, there may be some kind of rhetoric in the American candidates in regards to settling the West Asian or the Middle East war. Because if Trump win, actually, he may think of the Russia-Ukraine to put an end to it. But then I believe he will focus more on the regional war in the Middle East, where Iran will be the target for the future war and widening of the conflict with Israel and the rest of NATO members. So I think that is the worrisome in the Arab capital, that this will be flaring up if Trump comes to power. The second part, which is quite interesting, some of the scenarios people are putting, that Iran may go for an attack on Israel. And if attack on Israel pre to the election, that may swing the people voting toward Kamala Harris if Biden go and retaliate against Iran. That is one of the, scenario has been floating in the Arab capital that could be a swinging toward the Biden administration to stay in power, so to keep Trump out of the leadership. So I think these are the issues one has to consider and take in consideration. But overall, I think it's irrespective who is in the White House. It's after all the deep state, or what we call the arm industry, who define the wars, whether it's in Ukraine or it's in West Asia, or it could be in Asia Pacific.
Okay, let me quickly go across to Nicholas Nugent on that point. Nicholas, now as far as, of course, foreign policy goes, how dramatically is that likely to change depending on the presidential verdict, and the new occupant of the White House, be it Harris or Trump? How likely is the U.S. foreign policy vis-a-vis a plethora of issues, be it, of course, the U.S.-India relationship, which, of course, we are concerned about, be it the U.S.-China relationship also, which could perhaps change, or the U.S. viewpoint on, of course, the EU, and, of course, the conflicts vis-a-vis Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Hamas, and now, of course, it's spreading to Iran and Lebanon as well. How likely is foreign policy to change?
I will answer your question, but can I just anecdotally add something to what's been talked of already about Kamala Harris's Indian heritage? Because we just had a Prime Minister of Indian heritage in the form of Rishi Sunak. And my Indian friend said, but he's not really Indian. And they weren't very impressed with him. And then we had our election this year, and it seemed the British people weren't very impressed with him either. So don't read too much into heritage. It's a great development if you get somebody of what you might call non-native heritage. We've just got a new black leader of the Conservative Party. So I regard those as very positive steps.
Absolutely. That's a good point, because Rishi Sunak, might I add, was proud of his Hindu heritage. He would, of course, celebrate Diwali, and he did go to the Akshardham temple when he was here in India for the G20. But then we didn't see the FTA agreement go through in his prime ministership. Yes. So yes, please go ahead.
But then you didn't see it go through in Boris Johnson's premiership either. I remember being asked about that on air. So the point I'm making is just don't read too much into heritage. It may be a very positive step in any country's development to have a prime minister of non-native origin, but let's judge them according to their policies and such forth, as we have done in Britain, and I expect they will in the United States. But you're asking about the impact on foreign policy as seen from Britain and perhaps Europe. And I don't think there'll be much change Britain-wise, whoever becomes president. We have a so-called special relationship. If Donald Trump becomes president, we might get some increased trade restrictions, charges, whatever they're called, on our whiskey and such forth. But I don't think it'll be a very significant change. And our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has made it clear he will work with whoever is president, as you'd expect him to say. And incidentally, I'm not even sure he has met Kamala Harris. He's certainly met Donald Trump. So there we have a sort of first meeting. I may be wrong about that, but I don't remember it happening, certainly not since he became Prime Minister 3 months ago. But I don't think there will be much change to US-Britain relationship. But I prefer to answer your question in terms of Europe and particularly NATO. And this is where I have some concerns, because the United States is the linchpin of NATO. And NATO is, the NATO alliance is very, very significant at a time when the continent is at war. Let's be blunt about it. We have a major war. I'm talking about the Ukraine war going on. And NATO's solidarity is very important. And there have been major doubts raised about Donald Trump's commitment to NATO. So I think I express the feelings of the NATO members, that's the majority of European nations, in saying we have some concern if Donald Trump becomes president again as to whether he will show the commitment, A, to NATO in general, and B, to Ukraine in particular. Because that's the key issue, the key security issue facing Europe at the moment. So I do have that concern. I think I don't have a particular response regarding the European Union, because it's a sort of pragmatic alliance, you could say political stroke trading alliance, and they will continue to operate with whoever becomes president. So my major concern here for Europe, speaking for Europe, is about defense alliances and whether the new president continues to preside over the important alliances, notably NATO, that exist between the United States, Canada and Europe.
Okay. Now, we have seen also in the race a lot of celebrities, of course, endorse Kamala Harris, Sampat Shivangi, from, of course, Hollywood A-listers to other big celebrities there in the United States, to sportsmen as well. But also, of course, a big businessman backing has come in for Donald Trump in the form, of course, of Elon Musk. Other comedians also have, of course, supported him, but Elon has been active in the campaign. He's also, of course, been offering cash incentives for votes as well. That's also something new that's been seen this time around. How much is this big business support, big celebrity support likely to sway voters on ground?
Thank you. And I think, as you see, Mrs. Kamala Harris has more support in money-wise. She is getting, I'm told, billions of dollars, because all the big businesses are giving her $15 million, $100 million. That's a huge amount for any campaign. I think she does not lack any campaign funds, as far as I know. The difference between Ms. Harris, she has all these celebrities, especially the Hollywood singers and participants in so many movies are supporting Ms. Harris. She may have a chance. Earlier, I thought that she will not, but since the whole Hollywood is supporting her, all the rich billionaires, including Microsoft, Bill Gates has come to her rescue. Majority of the Democrats are supporting her. I think she has a very good chance. As far as money is concerned, it's not a problem at all. Only problem may be, even now, Indian Americans are divided in voting her as well as President Trump. Trump is very popular amongst Indian Americans in the US. Of course, Ms. Harris, they all know she's Indian, but so people will vote. I'm thinking she may get 30 to 40% of Indian votes, and 60%. Suddenly, the Indian vote has become a issue now because of Islamic votes and other minority votes are being counted. So President Trump has made a special issue to invite Indian Americans to join him and campaign amongst them. I think that makes difference. So we are 1.5, 2 million voters of Indian Americans. We do matter because if you count the minorities, Indian Americans do, and we vote definitely. An 80 to 90% voting record is there. So we are there to show who we are.
Yes, absolutely. Let me also now quickly bring in Gautam Mukherjee on, of course, the silent voter as well, Gautam, because we see it in India. We've seen it before too. The silent voter is often quiet and, they're the ones who prove the exit pollsters wrong and sway election, one way or the other. Are there silent voters in the US, and which way are they likely to go? Gautam.
Well, conventional wisdom has it, Uday, that the white rural voter, especially from the redneck and blue collar variety, will vote solidly for Trump. In the cities, the Republicans tend to be richer and have set ways, so they also will be, voting their party. Whether the African Americans will vote for Trump, some might, but I would imagine more of them will vote for the Democrats, as has been the case in election after election. Where is the evangelists, the Christian evangelists, these people will vote for Trump. You've got a big controversy on the abortion issue with Roe versus Wade finding that abortions are not to be allowed. This seems, in a common step. Again, America surprises you with some of its, decisions because you don't expect this from a liberal democracy. How can you decide whether a woman is going to have a baby or not? It's her business and possibly her family's, but certainly not the government's. And yet the Supreme Court decides to go with it, and the Republican Party stands solidly behind it. To what extent this will impact Trump's candidacy remains to be seen, but certainly whatever benefit may come out of this, apart from the hard right-wingers, the evangelists and so forth, the Catholics perhaps will go to Harris and the Democratic Party. So silent voters, there is a lot of disparity in America now. The wage earners are struggling to make ends meet. This is true in Europe as well. And the top layer, the 1% or so, owns practically 40-50% of everything, and the rest is spread between all the 290 plus million or whatever they are. I think the American population is still around 350 million, which from the Indian point of view would be a miracle. If we had 350 million people here, we would be the richest country in the world in no time at all. Let us see where the silent majority goes. But a lot of it is to do with personal freedoms. The LGBTQ community has been saying, we don't know, we want our rights, and they would lean Harris. The Republicans have become a bit, I think, off kilter as far as the public view goes, and that may work against them. Uday.
Okay, let me take that quickly across to Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, who I believe also has joined us now. Ambassador Kapoor, we've been of course discussing about the US elections, how close they are. What do you believe is that X factor which could sway the electorate one way or the other? What's it going to boil down to?
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry I joined late. I just traveled from US to India. So I'm joining from India for a change. And the election scene is...
Okay, I hope you've done your early vote there though and come.
Well, I'm not a US citizen, so it makes it easier for me to take a neutral view and a neutral perspective, which is in the overall interest of the US and of US-India relations. And what I see on the ground is that a much larger number of people are coming out to vote in these elections. And the number of people who will vote for Trump will also be much larger than have voted for Trump in the earlier two elections. And similarly for Kamala Harris also, the vote she will get will be much more than what Biden got or Hillary Clinton got. So the overall turnout, as we have seen even from the advanced voting patterns, is very, very high. And the expected turnout is even higher. I've spoken to a lot of people. What I see the change in the US during my travels within the US also is that 6 months back, 8 months back, people were very hesitant if they were Trump supporters to sort of come out openly or to defend the Trump track record or to talk about them voting for Trump. Now, in the last week, even when I was on the plane yesterday and today, there were people from the US who were very comfortable in saying that they're going to be voting for Trump and laying out the reasons why they'll vote for Trump. So I see that the voter base of Trump has become more confident about coming out in the open very comfortably. And they feel that the damage which the Democrats can do to US interests and US interests globally and inside America and US-India relations is probably, quite significant. So to that extent, for US-India relations, because if, Tim Walz has signed a document with the Muslims, for example, that Muslims will get an equal share in the running the country. And then there are so many woke elements who are supporting the Kamala Harris side. There are the progressive Democrats, there are the leftists, there are the liberals. So a lot of these people are going to be demanding the pound of flesh. And when Kamala Harris, if she wins, she will have to sort of have many IOU checks to the deep state also, to the military industrial complex also, and to the other elements I mentioned. So for the US interest, I see, if the breaking US forces, which are at the current moment aligned with the breaking India forces and which have a lot of overlap, they will get a lot of free play. With President Joe Biden, what I saw was a lot of these forces were able to be kept under check. With Trump, there is no doubt that he is very firm about it and he does not bow down to those pressures. So it's much easier for him to keep them under check. But currently, the ground situation seems to be that Kamala Harris seems to be ahead. The Democratic machinery, election machinery is very well oiled, very, smooth, very powerful, very well lubricated with a lot of fundraising and very comfortable to propagate their perspective, whether correct or not, whether lies or not lies, whether facts or not facts, through the mainstream media and through all the other channels. So a lot of people in the place where I live, for example, in Washington, D.C., they are very comfortable supporting Kamala Harris, a very large number. So I think the numbers who will ultimately come out in support of Kamala Harris will be more than Trump, and probably she is going to be the likely winner. In terms of the national vote, overall vote, she may be just marginally ahead, but in terms of the electoral vote, I think she will probably reach the desired target much faster than Trump. Back to you there.
Okay, let me take that across to to Dr. Awad as well. Dr. Awad, on of course now, the crunch states, the swing states. Which out of them do you believe are going to perhaps determine the ultimate result and the final result, of course? Do you believe it's going to be Pennsylvania? Do you believe it's going to be Iowa? Do you believe it's going to be one of the other states, or a combination of which way all of them go? Do you believe that is going to be the final determining factor? What's it going to come down to, Dr. Awad, given the fact that things are right now so very, very close?
Well, I think you have already said it. There are 7 states in the United States which can play the major role. These are the swinging states: Pennsylvania, Michigan,
No, but
and also Carolina.
amongst them, some are predicted to go Harris's way according to certain initial surveys. Others, Trump is leading. But which out of them do you believe is going to be the most unpredictable?
I think the North Carolina and Arizona will be more the 2 states which will play a major role because of the Muslim and the Arab votes on those states. If there is a slight margin, and if Trump really won the heart of the voting of the Muslim toward him, there may be some changes on that swinging these 2 states actually.
Okay, let me quickly get in, Sampath Sivangi on that point as well. Sampath, which are going to be, since you're in the US right now, which do you believe are going to be the most unpredictable states? It's going down to the wire. Which states do you believe are right now the most difficult to predict right now? Which are those 2 or 3 states which could sway things?
Again, the Georgia, we had a big issue with Georgia last time. I think Georgia is going to was the biggest problematic state. Maybe Michigan, Wisconsin. They are known for all, and Pennsylvania. Both the candidates will be in Pennsylvania today. President Trump is going to travel to Pennsylvania. So also Ms. Kamala Harris will be visiting Pennsylvania. Is a decisive state. I think more than any state, I think Pennsylvania makes all this news and makes all the sense as far as I'm concerned.
Ambassador Kapoor, is that something you agree with? Which are those 2 or 3 states that you are closely looking at, and what you've been hearing on ground right now are the ones looking the most unpredictable?
On that particular factor, as a most unpredictable and most important will be Pennsylvania because it has a very large number of electoral college votes. The other, of course, there are 7 total, but Arizona and others will also be very important. Georgia, etc., North Carolina. But Pennsylvania will ultimately be the battleground state, which will flip the fortunes one way or the other for either candidate.
Okay. Let me now address an important aspect also, another important aspect, Nicholas, with you. Because the fact is, Nicholas, that we saw last time that when the results came out, Donald Trump did not accept them. He said the election was stolen from him, and that, of course, there was cheating done, and because of that, Joe Biden won. How likely is it when the result comes out, and if it is indeed a very, very close election, that either side will accept the mandate? Are recounts likely? Are crying foul speeches likely from either side? What do you expect post voting on the 5th of November?
Well, you're asking me as a UK-based journalist to make a prediction. I'm simply in no position to do that.
Okay.
Just like I was hoping you weren't going to ask me what the states, crucial states are. But I will just add that Iowa is looking interesting. It's looking like a candidate to join the 7 swing states. But that's not the question you asked. You asked about the
Iowa is interesting, yes, because absolutely it's joined the swing states. One prediction right now, very, very closely, very, very recently, beg your pardon, has predicted it to go in the favor of Harris. But again, it's down to the wire, which and that Harris prediction did shock many as well. But yes, Nicholas, back to you on that question.
Yes, but I'm not authoritative. I only know what I read, and I was quite interested to read the Iowa polling result. But in answer to your question as to the likelihood of either candidate to accept the result if the other candidate wins, again, I have no prediction whatsoever. I've only said, I said already that I have some concerns, and I have concerns based partly on what happened on the 6th of January 2021 when Mr. Trump appeared to refused to accept the result. But as has been pointed out already, he was president at the time, so he had rather more power over events than he would if he were the loser this time. I think that's an important point that one of our speakers made. But the other concern for me is, well, it's partly the 6th of January factor. It's partly the closeness of the result. And close results are very often challenged wherever they happen.
Yes.
Mr. Trump is already talking about the attempts by the Democrats to steal the election. That doesn't bode well, the fact that he's making that comment in advance. And my final point, again, I've already made it, is the long delay, 2.5 months between the election itself and the inauguration. As it happens, I'll be in the US on Inauguration Day, and I really hope that it all goes peacefully.
Yes.
But
we're running out of time. Gautam Mukherjee, last word to you on, on, of course, the outcome. Is it going to be a few days before we know the final result? Do you expect recounts? Do you expect challenges? Or do you believe it perhaps will just be a few hours? Gautam Mukherjee.
Yes, well, one of the groupings that I haven't mentioned so far, and neither have any of the others, are the Hispanics. There's been a controversy just now with this garbage comment, and with Trump riding a garbage truck thereafter to assuage feelings.
And wearing a garbage vest on stage too.
Now there are a lot of different ethnic minorities. Mr. Awad said about the Arab American, there are the Indian Americans, there are the Hispanics in sizable percentages, and of course the blacks. Then you've got almost a block, all these people who are labeled woke and represent a lot of different subsections. Now, all of these people are going to be involved. Now, the conventional wisdom is that Trump will be the one to challenge in case, he loses. I wouldn't put it past the Democrats and all these different subgroups that support the Biden-Harris administration to take to the streets if they don't win. So it's going to be very interesting, because the Americans don't seem to accept the ballot if it doesn't go their way, which is very strange, but it's one of those things. They also haven't updated their processes. There's a lot of difference between one state and another in counting and process. They still do physical ballots. There's a lot of room for confusion and delayed results and partial results. So let us see. Uday.
My thanks to all of our guests for joining us on this discussion. We've run completely out of time. Let's slip into a short break.
अगर आप बनना चाहते हैं एंकर या फिर आप में है जुनून एक तेज तर्रार न्यूज रिपोर्टर बनने का, तो आप ज्वाइन करें ITV और इंडिया न्यूज़ का मीडिया स्कूल। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का कोर्स आपको मौका देता है देश के दिग्गज एंकर्स के साथ काम करने का। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल में आप बेहद नजदीकी से देख पाएंगे किस तरह से ITV नेटवर्क के दिग्गज पत्रकारों की टीम दिन रात खबरों पर काम करती है। इस कोर्स के दौरान आप सीखेंगे एंकरिंग की एक एक बारीकी उन एंकर्स के साथ जो देश को रखते हैं हर खबर से बाखबर। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का ये कोर्स आपके एंकरिंग स्किल्स को करेगा इतना सशक्त, मजबूत, जिससे आप बनेंगे पत्रकारिता की दुनिया का वो चमकता चेहरा जो दुनिया देखेगी और पसंद करेगी।
The US presidential elections 2024.
We are in the final lap of the United States elections, and the pulse of the voters is all that matters now.
We are at Bryant Park in New York City, and as you can see, this place is extremely crowded with a lot of people. Who do you think is a better president?
They're both terrible, but I guess Trump had a better economy.
Trump, on the other hand, is going to be in Wisconsin and North Carolina, and then he's going to be back in Wisconsin on Friday.
Well, I don't think Trump really has a clue what he would do as president.
Kamala Harris is leading in the national polls right now, but by less than a point.
Pennsylvania is the most important state.
Newsx has got you covered. Road to 270 only on Newsx.
अगर आप बनना चाहते हैं एंकर या फिर आप में है जुनून एक तेज तर्रार न्यूज रिपोर्टर बनने का, तो आप ज्वाइन करें ITV और इंडिया न्यूज़ का मीडिया स्कूल। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का कोर्स आपको मौका देता है देश के दिग्गज एंकर्स के साथ काम करने का। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल में आप बेहद नजदीकी से देख पाएंगे किस तरह से ITV नेटवर्क के दिग्गज पत्रकारों की टीम दिन रात खबरों पर काम करती है। इस कोर्स के दौरान आप सीखेंगे एंकरिंग की एक एक बारीकी उन एंकर्स के साथ जो देश को रखते हैं हर खबर से बाखबर। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का ये कोर्स आपके एंकरिंग स्किल्स को करेगा इतना सशक्त मजबूत जिससे आप बनेंगे पत्रकारिता की दुनिया का वो चमकता चेहरा जो दुनिया देखेगी और पसंद करेगी।
Hello and welcome. I'm Pratap Singh. You're joining us on Newsx. Our big focus this hour, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are continuing their blitz across key swing states such as Georgia, Michigan and North Carolina as they press for any possible advantage in the closing hours of the campaign. Yes, our big focus remains on the US elections. I'm Pratap Singh. Thanks for being with us on this special coverage. We're building up, of course, to voting day in the US. The latest numbers reveal that more than 78 million voters in America have already cast their votes. Let's quickly take a look at the latest rallies of Trump and Harris as they build up to voting day and they make their final pitches, particularly in the swing states.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are pushing their closing messages to voters on their last day of campaigning before America decides its next president. Both candidates are in a final sprint across key battleground states, with Harris to campaign in Pennsylvania today and Trump heading to North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. On Sunday, Harris vowed to do everything in her power to end the war in Gaza, while Trump made claims, without providing any evidence, of election fraud in Pennsylvania. Donald Trump's final Georgia rally filled the Atrium Health Amphitheater in the city of Macon on Sunday, with early voting tallies showing that supporters from the state's middle could prove to be decisive in the waning days of the election. Sticking to familiar themes, the former president said he would invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1790 and would pursue the death penalty for undocumented immigrants who kill an American.
The day I take the oath of office, the migrant invasion ends and the restoration of our country begins.
Kamala Harris pledged to do everything in her power to end the war in Gaza in her final rally in Michigan on Sunday, as she attempted to appeal to the state's large Arab American and Muslim American population 2 days out from the election.
As president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza.
With Harris and the former president essentially tied in Michigan, a drop in voting numbers for either could be critical, and Harris made a clear appeal at the beginning of her speech. The polls suggest the race is still exceptionally close and more than 75 million people have already voted. Bureau Report Newsx.
And of course, even as this key swing, of course, continues, and of course also the campaigning, of course, continues. Let's, of course, also open it up to our special guests who are joining us live. Manju Seth, former diplomat, is live with us. Lord Rami Ranger, House of Lords of the United Kingdom, is also joining us live. Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, joins us live. Rohan Gunaratnam, Middle East expert, is live with us on the broadcast as well. Bradley Thayer, author at Center for Security Policy, is joining us live. Daniel Wagner, CEO Country Risk Solutions, also joins the broadcast. Welcome all of you and thank you very much for being with us today. Ambassador Seth, let me begin with you first. It's going down to the wire. What is going to be the X factor that could possibly sway the result for either side?
Very difficult to say so, because at the moment, all polls are saying it is neck to neck, and she's ahead sometimes, and he's ahead sometimes, Donald Trump. So it's becoming a very tight and keenly contested election, and I think it could go either way. It's a very, very tight race. And the role, I didn't get the second part of your question. Can you repeat that again, please?
Yes, it was on the X factors. What do you believe are the determining issues, the main, reasons why the swing states could swing a particular way?
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons is that, the two wars have become major issues. Immigration has become a major issue. And this could go either way, because now both sides are giving their policies on this. And Donald Trump has said clearly he will stop illegal immigration. And it's interesting that while the Democrats have opened up and said we will allow more immigration, but they've also carefully said illegal immigration they will not allow, and they would encourage legal immigration. Healthcare, education, these are all main issues that would really impact even in the swing states. And of course, the Indian American community and the other communities of different, the Hispanics, the black community, all of these are important in all these swing states. And I think they will, as we know that some of them were supporters of the Democrats, but even there we have seen that there are some who are thinking either they are, undecided at the moment, or they're also going towards Donald Trump for various reasons. And I think one of the main issues is the two wars that have sort of alienated or angered all young Americans especially, and because their jobs are impacted, their whole future is impacted, and they're really very unhappy with the way things have gone in the last 4 years. So I think this will be another issue. The war will be another issue that will play a major role even in these main swing states. Okay.
Rami Ranger, let me quickly draw you in here, Lord Ranger, on, of course, this election. It's going down to the wire, certainly, of course, but do you believe that the silent voter could be crucial? Those who are, of course, not speaking right now, but will cast their ballot very soon, or have already done so, who could they end up favouring? That is, of course, the big question, Lord Ranger. And also, how is the UK viewing this election? What's the perspective there on ground?
People can come and go, but allies remain steadfast. UK and USA are very strong allies. So the government can change, but the strategy and the relationship will remain steadfast. You rightly said the election is very close to call, and it will be decided by the undecided voters at the last minute, because both candidates have tremendous appeal to big sections of American population, and the war is a very big factor. Second factor is the economy, and third factor is immigration, and fourth factor is law and order, which is really going down the drain in USA. So therefore, there are many factors which will influence the voters. And as far as UK-USA relationship are concerned, they are, really 200 years old, and people have come and gone, and nothing matters. So we are the closest allies, speak the same language, we have common history and common values. Therefore, our relationship will remain undisturbed no matter who is in the White House.
Okay, let me in fact quickly also then take that across to you, Professor Nalapat, on, of course, what it's going to come down to. Of course, the swing states right now are pretty much, of course, what it's going to boil down to. Which of those states do you believe are the most unpredictable currently? And Professor Nalapat, as far as India is concerned, what is the Indian viewpoint on this election? Who's going to be a better friend of India in the White House? And how should Indians be viewing this US presidential poll, which is going to be perhaps the most closely contested ones?
Well, Uday, I'd like to say that I always believe that in a close contest, the side that makes the most self-goals or does better than the side that does basically does not make a that they do frankly much worse than the side that is not going to go in and create a goal in its own through its own goalpost. Now the problem with Kamala Harris is that Waltz is a very poor choice of vice president, and all kinds of stories are surfacing about him. Social media has been weaponized for the last 2 or 3 election cycles, and you're seeing that weaponization in full play in the United States. And you're seeing so many videos about Waltz and China, but that time, of course, China was an ally, but those videos are being surfacing now. So the question is whether an unscripted Trump will prevail in the minds of American voters over a highly scripted Kamala Harris. And as you said, she's very closely associated with the Ukraine war. She has talked about ending Gaza. She hasn't talked about how it's going to happen. So frankly, these are questions that will also need to be asked. Whereas Trump is crystal clear on a lot of the issues. So I would only like to say that the advantage that Kamala Harris has got is that Democrats have got a formidable ground game. And in an election, of course, a ground game counts for an awful lot. So Trump, I'm not sure that his ground game is as good as Kamala Harris's. Otherwise, frankly, that kind of a gaffe made by that comedian against Puerto Rico and by implication Latino community, it will never have happened. But certainly, that is an advantage that Kamala Harris has got. So yes, Ambassador Seth is right on points that it is a very close election. Thank you.
Okay, Rohan Gunaratna, come in here on, of course, the Middle East, because you're, of course, an expert on Middle East affairs. I have to ask you, Rohan Gunaratna, what is going to be the impact of the conflict in the Middle East on this election and the positions the two candidates have taken on the Middle East, and what you believe, of course, will be the impact this election result will have on the war ahead?
Yes, so the Middle East is extremely
Rohan Gunaratna, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I think we've lost Rohan's connection, unfortunately. But yes, Bradley Thayer, you'd like to take that?
Yes, happy to.
With respect to the Middle East, it's my pleasure to join you.
I'll just come. I'm coming to you, Daniel, in a second. Yes, Bradley, please go ahead. And I'd like you to, since you're coming in, Bradley, we'd like you to weigh in, of course, yes, on the Middle East conflict, but also on the Russia-Ukraine war, which also is a war that, of course, has also come up in the election rhetoric, and also perhaps whoever comes in the White House will have an impact on that war going ahead as well.
Well, indeed, there are sharp differences between Harris and Trump on the Middle East and on Ukraine, as well as on China. So with respect to the Middle East, the differences are Harris would continue Biden's policies with respect to Iran and the pressure on Israel that Biden has continued, whereas Trump would do the reverse of that in the Middle East, would work very closely with Israel and work to pressure Iran accordingly. With respect to Ukraine, Harris would continue Biden's policies of that is sustaining the war, feeding essentially Ukraine with the financial, with the military, with the diplomatic support, and running the risk, of course, of increasing escalation of that conflict. Whereas Trump has said explicitly that he will work to end that war, and that will be one of his first priorities if he were to come into office on January 20th, 2025. I would just add, of course, finally, on China, very importantly, of course, for Indian and American audiences, that again, Harris is quite likely to continue Biden's policies of engagement with the Chinese Communist Party. And Trump is quite likely, almost assuredly, will be very tough on trade, investment, and on security elements against the People's Republic of China. So stark differences in foreign policy, major foreign policy issues between Harris and Trump.
Yes, absolutely. Let me, in fact, quickly also address some news coming in this hour before I go across to Daniel Wagner. Ahead of the much anticipated US presidential election results, a record-breaking 78 million early voters have already cast their vote. So that's the big breaking news coming in. 78 million early voters have already cast their vote. That's a pretty record-breaking figure, isn't it, Daniel Wagner? 78 million Americans have already cast their vote. Yes, that's Daniel. Can you hear me, Daniel Wagner?
Yes, I hear you.
Yes, Daniel, pretty staggering figure. Records being broken, of course. 78 million early voters have cast their mandate. What do you make of that figure? And also, yes, I'd like you to weigh in on the impact of the conflict as well that you were just speaking about before we interrupted you.
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, this record number of 78 million is there for a reason. And that is because really since Mr. Trump went down the escalator in 2015, it's been all Trump all the time, 24/7 for the last 8 or 9 years. And Americans certainly understand the importance of this election. Now, many states have mail ballot only voting, which means they will have voted well before Tuesday. And this number is reflective of that. But if this number, in fact, is reflective of how engaged voters are, the question ultimately becomes, who's voting? Is this a Trump voter? Is this a Harris voter? Is it men? Is it women? Is it young? Is it old? And that's what we don't know. We know that voters in general are engaged in this process, but what we don't know is the composition of who is voting. If it's more women, it's better for Harris. If it's more men, it's probably better for Trump. If it's younger men who Trump has successfully engaged, probably better for Trump. If it's progressives, it's probably better for Harris. So we just don't know at this point. It is a good sign, however, because the message that voters need to get out and vote has been received, and I think most Americans understand the gravity of this election. Now, on the rest of the world, I concur with many of the things the previous speaker just said, and that is that the policy of engagement with Ukraine and support for Ukraine is very likely to continue under a Harris administration. The question is, what is the composition of the Congress? Is the composition of the Congress going to allow her to continue? If, for example, as is expected, the Republicans take the Senate, but the Democrats take the House, we have a divided Congress. What does that imply then for the likely success of a Harris administration or a Trump administration wanting to pursue their policies? Clearly, Trump doesn't want to continue to fund Ukraine. Harris does. We just don't know. On China, I think either way, there's going to continue to be engagement with China, and the idea of cooperation and collaboration where there can be, but otherwise a policy of conflict and competition between the two countries. And that is a legacy from the Trump administration, which is not going to die. That is something that is a permanent fixture in the American political psyche now. As for the Middle East, I also concur with some of the prior comments that were made, which is that support for Israel is ironclad. It's not going to change no matter who is in the White House. The question is, what are the potential impacts? I don't see, regardless of who gets into the White House, any substantial change in support for Israel.
Yes, okay. Let me, take that back across to you now, Ambassador Manju Seth, on, on of course the Indian viewpoint as well. What should Indians be? how should Indians be viewing this election, and who will be a better friend of India, whatever the outcome is?
I think the only plus point in all this is that both sides have expressed a positive, sort of given a positive spin to their to the projected relationship between India and the US. So I think both of them support, both Republicans and Democrats support good relations with India. They understand that India will be their sort of partner, and they are looking at continuing this partnership, including, if you look at Donald Trump's statements, he has made some very positive statements, and as have the Democrats and Kamala Harris as well. They are looking at a strong relationship with India, and I think we will work with whoever is there. And we've had so far fairly good working relationship with both the Biden administration and when Trump was there with his administration. So I think though there are some positives in both. And when the Biden administration was in power, has been in power right now. We have seen many fast track developments compared to Donald Trump's time. But yes, they have also been positive and been beneficial, mutually beneficial. And any government or any whoever comes to power will also ensure, yes, they will first ensure their own interest, their own self-interest. And if they converge, the interests of both India and US converge on various issues, it will definitely be strong under whichever administration comes in. And we have seen that in recent times, though we've had very good working relationship with the US government, there have been some pinpricks here and there. So those, we don't know how, how it will pan out in the future, because if Kamala Harris comes in, I don't know if she will carry on the same policy of the Biden administration, of a positive relationship, very positive relationship, but at the same time a little bit of pinpricking here and there. We don't know. I think that's to keep the balance, I think. But yes, whoever comes to power, I see a good partnership, a good relationship between India and the US. Okay.
Daniel Wagner, on the swing states, which do you believe is currently looking the most unpredictable? Which are the states it's going to boil down to from your assessment so far, which could, of course, sway the mandate one way or the other?
Well, the question is, are polls to be believed? And polls have been notoriously wrong through many elections in America in the recent past. So the one swing state that everyone agrees is absolutely critical and absolutely pivotal is Pennsylvania. And that's because it has 19 votes. And that could swing the election one way or the other, and it's on an absolute knife edge. Question is, will voters ultimately decide in a few counties in Pennsylvania, which may ultimately swing this election, to support Mr. Trump or Ms. Harris? And in my mind, there's no way to predict which way that's going to go. It could go either way, not only in Pennsylvania, but in so many of the other swing states, in Wisconsin, in North Carolina, Arizona. We just don't know. And if you've been able to look at US media in the last weeks, and especially the last days, you'll see that the majority of political pundits also don't know, and they're hesitating to suggest which way it may go. The irony in this whole thing is that because of the swing states, it almost doesn't matter which way 99.9% of American voters vote, because the outcome of the election is preordained. Most of the states, we know exactly whether they're going Republican or Democratic. It's those swing states where we don't know which way they're going to go. And in many of those cases, it ultimately boils down to a few thousand voters in a few places that will ultimately decide the course of this election.
Absolutely. Professor Nalapat, quickly coming back across to you. Interestingly, that was a point that Daniel just made, that polls in the US have gone horribly wrong. We've seen exit polls in India too in the recent past, of course, vis-a-vis the Lok Sabha general elections and the recent Haryana state elections, where exit polls were proven wrong. How accurate are these surveys and exit polls going to be for the US What's your hunch? Should they be taken with a pinch of salt?
Uday, I want to point out one factor. And I mean, I've seen reports that, for example, a Chinese national voted in the election. And the only reason why he was found out was because he wanted his ballot back out of fear that possibly, like in China, your name is on the ballot, so he may be identified and possibly deported. So he tried to get his ballot back, which is, of course, impossible. But this is a worrying situation because according to these reports, all he was asked to do was to certify that, yes, he's American. I'm surprised that the United States doesn't have a computer database of actual citizens that can be compared with voters. So that immediately when you have a voter who's not a citizen impersonating as a US citizen, you can find it out. But if these reports are true about this particular Chinese national voting in the US election, and of course it's too late to do anything about it, the vote is already out. I mean, it's been dropped. But this is a worrying situation. And I think that's where we need to have foolproof security so that only citizens can vote. As far as the voting numbers are concerned, yes, a huge number of people, nearly 80 million voters have voted. But Donald Trump, even though he had reservations about the whole point about early voting and maybe mail-in voting, he has urged his voters, vote early, mail in if you need to, but please vote. So from that point of view, the fact that you have a huge number of early, voters does not mean an advantage for either side. As I said, if a few thousand votes count, then it's very important that all those votes be of US citizens, because otherwise the election could go the way other than what US citizens wanted to go. That's an important factor, Uday, that we need to keep in mind. Thank you.
Yes, let me take that quickly across to you as well, Bradley Thayer. On, of course, now, Bradley. Okay, I believe Rohan Gunaratna has joined us now. I believe we've managed to fix his connection. So let's quickly get in his opening comment and then I'll come back to you, Bradley. Rohan Gunaratna, I was trying to get you in here earlier on, of course, the X factors that are important this election, which could sway the mandate. But also, since you, of course, deal closely with the Middle East, what impact do you believe the Middle East conflict has had on this election and the positions the candidates have taken, and what impact the outcome will have on the war going ahead?
Iran is terrified that if Trump wins, that Trump will support Israel's campaign to dismantle the nuclear infrastructure in Iran. So at this point, there is a considerable concern and a fear on the part of Tehran that Trump will win and Trump will fully support Israel's agenda to attack the nuclear infrastructure in Iran. Now, with regard to Israel, there is significant support. The Jewish community, the Israeli community, they support Trump because they believe it will be good for Israel, especially those parties that are fighting the Seven Front War at this point. So if Trump comes, certainly he has repeatedly said that Iran developing a nuclear capability will be a threat to the United States, will be a global threat. So certainly the United States will give more support to Israel. Of course, Kamala Harris too will support Israel, but I think that Trump, for many reasons, will step up assistance to Israel.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. Let me quickly go back across to you, Bradley Thayer, on, of course, the swing states, according to you, which are right now looking the most unpredictable, and are you taking the polls with a pinch of salt, or do you believe they're pretty accurate because things are going down to the wire currently?
Well, thank you. It's a devilishly difficult question, of course, whether the polls are accurate. There's one argument or school of thought that the polls are undercounting Trump voters. in the swing states. And if that's true, you could conceivably have a Trump overwhelming victory that is in excess of 300 electoral votes, where he might sweep most or all of the 7 swing states. A second school of thought, of course, is that the polling is more or less accurate, and in which case then, as my colleagues have expressed today, that it will be a very tight election. The critical states are, as have been mentioned, Pennsylvania, because of its weight, because of its electoral count, the electoral votes that it has in our electoral college. But additionally, Michigan and Wisconsin are critical, particularly Wisconsin, which does seem to be leaning towards Trump, and Arizona, which also does seem to be leaning towards Trump. So with respect to the polls, I think what we will see is that there's a great surprise that they grossly undercounted the Trump vote, or they're more or less accurate, and that they're showing the tightness of the race in the 7 critical swing states. And then, of course, after we have the election on Tuesday, we then move into a second stage of where the electoral college process takes over, where there might be, if it is a close election, the audience should expect, of course, considerable legal challenges as we move in through the steps of December 11th, December 17th, when the Electoral College will actually vote, and then January 6th, where the Congress will certify. So if it's a tight election, the drama will not be over, but will continue into a new stage.
Yes, indeed. Lord Ranger, let me quickly draw you back in here on whether you believe this is, perhaps the most polarized election you've seen in the recent past. Internationally, but more particularly in the United States, Lord Ranger. And is it more emotion than issues that are weighing heavy on voters' mind this time? Lord Ranger, can you hear me? Okay, I think we're having some connection issues with Lord Ranger. But let me take that back across to you, Daniel. Do you believe this is perhaps the most polarized election we've seen in recent times in the United States of America? And is it true that this time issues are not high on the plate, it's more emotion? Is that accurate or not?
Well, I think it's important to bear in mind that in 2016 and 2020, we also had a terribly divided vote, and we've lived in America in a terribly divided country. I don't see that changing no matter who wins, and the legacy of Mr. Trump, no matter what happens, is going to endure in the political landscape of America, which means we can expect that it will continue to be a terribly divided country. There is a lot of emotion involved here, not only because of the issues that are at stake, and the most important issues, of course, are abortion and illegal immigration. Those are the top 2 issues for a lot of voters, as well as the economy, of course. Depending on which side of the coin that you're on, one is more important than the other. But some semblance of all 3 of those issues are on voters' minds. Emotions are extremely high. It's been the case, unfortunately, in America for many years now, where you can't sit down with your friends, you can't sit down with your family and go into politics and expect that it's going to be a civil discussion, or expect that you will want to engage with everyone that's at the table. Unfortunately, I live in a country now where if someone is a Harris supporter and someone that they know is a Trump supporter, they may not want to be friends with them anymore, and vice versa. It doesn't matter what other attributes that person may have. It's boiled down in many cases to which side of the political divide are you on. This is a really sad commentary on America and what American society has become. You could argue that this has largely been the result of Mr. Trump stirring the pot in America for the last 8 or 9 years and stirring up all of these issues and all of these emotions. You could also argue that if he hadn't have done that, eventually this would have happened. You could also argue that no matter whether he stirred the pot or not, those issues are going to exist. And the people who feel that they've been underrepresented in American political discourse are going to want to be represented. And once that genie has been let out of the bottle, there's no putting it back. So we have to expect going forward that this type of environment that we're in is just going to endure. And it's got so many ramifications. I want to just comment on one or two things that prior speakers have said. One speaker questioned whether America has a functional electronic database of its voters. Well, of course it does. The issue is that in America, we have 50 states which operate like 50 different countries. And this creates terrible problems in terms of how we count the vote, how we tabulate the vote, how we keep track of voters. And when you've got 50 different states doing 50 different approaches, there's bound to be problems and you can have anomalies. But it is worth saying also that there's been very, very few instances of illegal immigrants successfully voting in America. One way or another, they are generally caught, and there's only been a few examples of when they haven't been caught. Yeah. So the idea of making this, a huge issue in the vote just is irrelevant.
American democracy vis-a-vis, say, Indian democracy, because we don't have this in India, do we, Professor Nalapat? Thankfully, and America likes to lecture, the world on democracy and on human rights and other issues, but they need to look inwards. If there are cases like this of foreigners voting, of malpractices being alleged, of these paper ballots and other systems being questioned by candidates, this doesn't really happen in India, does it?
Uday, fortunately it does not. And that's why you had a situation where the exit polls predicted a huge victory for the BJP. And instead, frankly, the BJP only narrowly escaped the result that Rahul Gandhi had predicted for it, which is 220 Lok Sabha seats. The party got 240. So it's very clear that, that of course, one, the exit polls can go wrong. And secondly, that Indian democracy is working very well, because the diatribe against India was that, it's not a democracy. Every institution has been captured. Government has got full control. Well, in that case, are you telling me the government ensured that its own tally in the lower house of parliament went to a level which is dangerously low? I mean, that is absurd. So I think 2024 election proved the soundness of Indian democracy. There's one issue talking about countries today. Russia, Trump and Harris are very different on Russia. Trump is very clear he doesn't want to spend money on Ukraine. And I think a lot of US voters, especially those at the lower ends of the economic level, they're going to say, why are you spending all this money on Ukraine and Zelensky when we need it a lot? I mean, we are more important. We need it. Or is Ukraine more important to you? So I think frankly, where Russia is concerned, I think they would prefer Donald Trump for a simple reason, not the absurd allegation that he's a Russian agent, which was made by Hillary Clinton. And frankly, one problem that Harris is facing, a lot of her campaign pitch has been talking negative things about Trump. Now, Hillary Clinton, the same thing, and she didn't end up very well, finally. So I always believe it's better to stress on what you can do, stress on the positives, and don't try and tar your opponent in a very negative way. Now, that way, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance had a very civilized debate among each other. So Russia is an important, Iran. Well, the fact is, Netanyahu has more or less come to the conclusion that it is possible to take out Iran's nuclear capacity. Well, one thing I can tell you very clearly, if there is a huge degrading of that capacity, it's going to affect the mullahs in Iran very badly. The clerical regime is not popular among the people. And if you have a major military debacle in Iran, the clerical regime is likely to be quite shaky. So Iran, yes, will be watching very carefully and for its own reasons. It's ridiculous to say that Kamala Harris is pro-Iran or Trump is pro-Russia. No, they're both Americans. They're looking at what they think is American interest. But if Trump believes with Netanyahu that, look, you can take out or degrade practically the most effective parts of Iran's nuclear arsenal. That, I think, is going to shake the clerical regime. And certainly the clerics are therefore certainly not very, not the supporters of a Trump presidency. Thank you, Uday.
Absolutely. Professor Nalapath, stay with us. Let me take that to Rohan Gunaratna. Rohan Gunaratna, how important are issues this US election? Or do you believe that this is a polarized election where emotion is high and not issues so much?
Is very decisive at this point for the international community because the world is polarizing, countries are fragmenting, and the United States position, the candidate that is going to be elected is going to decide on global stability and security in the coming months, coming years. So the international community will closely watch what is happening in the United States and the positions adopted that will be adopted by these two candidates. As we speak today, we can see very clearly BRICS emerging as a very significant entity. We have also seen some difficulties on the part of the Europeans of working with the Americans. We have also seen, with regard to India, new developments, rapprochement with China, and perhaps in the future rapprochement even with Pakistan. So the US will have to navigate very carefully in the coming months and coming years to make sure that there is global security and global stability. So this is an election everyone is watching, not only the Americans, but the whole world.
Yes, absolutely. Let me quickly take that across to you as well. On, of course, this very important aspect, Ambassador Manju said, of course, this being a very different election from the rest. It's, of course, the most closely contested ones. But do you believe this is an election that is very different from the rest? Is that something you agree with? Also, Ambassador Manju said, what impact is this election going to have on foreign policy of the US going ahead?
Yes, it is very, very different from previous elections. And the world, the geopolitical shifts taking place across the world. The world is a very different place today. The US is also very different. And I think all the factors, as mentioned by the speakers also, they're going to be all important factors in determining the future of America. And of course, it's going to impact the entire world, who wins. And the foreign policies, they will, as mentioned again by previous speakers, vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis the two wars, they're going to be different, which depending on who is in office. Former President Donald Trump has said that he would end the wars. He wants to take America out of the wars. He would support Israel in its endeavors and maybe, targeting Iran in some way. But the current wars that are going on, he has said that he would like to end them. He wants America out of those wars. So that policy will remain unchanged. Yes, with China, again, there will be some change. If the Democrats come, they will continue engagement with China while also trying to counter it, in Quad along with its partners, Quad partners, and also in trade. On trade, also there's going to be some changes, especially because if former President Donald Trump comes, he has spoken of a little more, in a closed kind of policy that he would follow. He wants to make America great again, and he wants to make manufacturing again important in America, create jobs. Of course, both governments or both administrations will want to create jobs, but they would like to impose, especially former President Donald Trump has said, even impose tariffs to ensure that products from outside are more expensive when they come into the US, to encourage local manufacturing. But that is true of most countries, most important countries these days. They are becoming a little more inward-looking. And as far as the Biden administration, the Harris administration will be, I think they will carry forward most of the current policies of the Biden government, though she has said that she will move away from most of them. But I think the policies, major policies, will remain the same, foreign policies, vis-a-vis other countries. So we have to, though she has said that she would like to end the war in Gaza, but on what terms, what conditions, what terms and conditions? Because she cannot not afford to continue support to Israel. Yes, a negotiated settlement is the only way. Talks and diplomacy are the only way to find a solution. And if she succeeds in that, I think that would be a major achievement, not only for her, but for the entire region, for the world. And as far as Ukraine and the Russia war goes, I think it's been going on too long, and I think there's a lot of fatigue, even in the US. And whoever comes to power will have to rethink, I think, their policy on Ukraine. And as far as other countries are concerned, I think by and large, the foreign policy approach of the US administration, whoever is in power, will be, as I said earlier also, will be to first ensure American interests, irrespective of with which country, with which region or which organization they are dealing with, and to also, I think, to try and safeguard their current numero uno position that they are at. They would not like to be challenged by anyone. China has already begun to show some indications of challenge, and again, action has been swiftly taken by the American governments to engage with China, but at the same time, remove all the supply chains, to diversify the supply chains away from China, and which will hurt China. And so I think they have got this clear in their minds. First, both administrations, whoever comes, both parties, whoever comes will ensure American interest first, but yes, slightly different ways. But I think the Quad will continue, the current engagement with India will continue, and with some, back and forth, because even Donald Trump has said that India charges huge tariffs, and we will, ensure that we put very high tariffs on. India charges a lot of tariff, imposes a lot of tariffs, so we will do the same, kind of reciprocity. So I think there will be some changes, but overall, if you look at American foreign policy, it will not radically change vis-a-vis India, but yes, with some other countries, we can expect some change. With the two wars, with Russia, with China, there will be some changes, I think. But yes, overall, US interest will be first, paramount.
Absolutely. What about, Bradley Thayer, these celebrity endorsements for Kamala Harris? What is going to be the impact of these celebrity endorsements? Are they going to sway the public in the US? Also, the fact that, Elon Musk has been backing Trump so vociferously. How much of an impact is that going to make? He also came out, of course, with some cash incentives as well for voters. That's also something unique to this particular election. What's going to be the impact of him on the Trump campaign?
Certainly. Well, with respect to the first question of the impact of celebrity endorsements, it's expected that particularly Taylor Swift has endorsed Kamala Harris, and she has some influence, considerable influence with younger Americans. So the so-called Swifties. So Taylor Swift's endorsement, I think, is the most significant with respect to Harris's campaign, and that should expect to have some tangible effect, that is, in terms of ballots cast for Harris. With respect to the other celebrity endorsements are, I think, more niche or will be more attenuated in their effect of other celebrities, for example, film stars or musicians who've endorsed Harris. With respect to Elon Musk, this is very significant because X, formerly known as Twitter, of course, is a platform that most Americans use. Of course, it's a global phenomenon, of course, but most Americans use X to some degree for news, for information, and for sharing thoughts and opinions in every respect. But of course, most importantly, the political thoughts and opinions. So Musk's endorsement of Trump, I think, is very significant. And his platform X, which is allowing exchange, which is allowing essentially information to be exchanged without the filters of other social media, for example, Facebook or other platforms, again, underscores that significance. With respect to the tactics that he's employing in Pennsylvania, again, to stress the point, a critical swing state, I think that this is an issue that is one which has received considerable attention, although I think it will have the effect of not having the impact perhaps on Pennsylvania voters who seem to be, as you have stressed at the outset of the program, over 78 million Americans have already voted in this election. And by election day tomorrow, Tuesday, November 5th, that number will be even significantly higher. So that is a remarkable change in American electoral history, shows an enormous turnout. Elon Musk's tactics, I think, are less significant than his endorsement of Trump and the platform of X for conveying information between and among American voters. That, I think, is a critical difference and very unlike 2020, for example, where Twitter at that time under Jack Dorsey had a very different tact.
Okay. Daniel Wagner.
I want to jump in for a minute.
Yes, Professor.
And talk about this,
Sure.
A point was made about very few votes of illegal citizens.
Yeah, absolutely.
The emphasis is it a foolproof system or not? Of course, we all have electronics. Almost every country in the world does. But the question is, even if there are a limited number, it's not the number that matters. It's the principle that only citizens should vote. So that is my point, quite frankly, Uday. And I just thank you for giving me the opportunity to state that clearly. The emphasis is on foolproof, and the election system has to be foolproof in a democracy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Joyita also made that point interestingly in a previous debate, that she was quite horrified and shocked to hear an analyst on a US on a US channel, actually an anchor or a journalist saying that oh, so what, it was just a few ballots and not too many. But as you said, it's about how foolproof the system is. Even one illegal vote or two illegal votes is bad enough. Let me quickly draw back in Daniel Wagner on the point of course, now how soon we're going to get the result. Daniel Wagner, do you expect this to go into a few days, or do you expect the result in the first 24 hours after voting concludes? It's going to go down to the wire. Do you expect challenges, recounts? Do you believe this will take a few days before it is final and dusted?
The issue isn't it. The issue is ultimately, unless there is a blowout on either side, I don't think we're going to see a result on Tuesday night in America. And in fact, if you look at previous election history, you will note that sometimes it takes days or even weeks to determine the actual outcome. And with the stakes as high as they are here, I'd be very surprised if we have an actual blowout, or whether we have the answer on Tuesday night. If you understand that both sides have had lawyers in many of the swing states camped out there already for days and weeks in preparation for what may be coming, the challenges and the questions about legitimacy and accuracy of vote counts. Both sides are prepared for this. I think if there is a blowout, the question is, will the other side also acknowledge it? And that ultimately is the biggest question in my mind about whether the sanctity of the American vote and the legitimacy of the process will be honored by both sides. I just wanted to say one word also about Trump and foreign policy. Unfortunately, Mr. Trump has made foreign policy a personal issue. It's almost as if, this is something that he personally wants or doesn't want. And if you think about how he has reduced the foreign policy process to a transactional process, and often a question simply of money, it is a very dangerous road to go down. In July 2016, I wrote for the For the very first time that I thought Mr. Trump had narcissistic personality disorder, this was subsequently said by tens of thousands of psychological professionals that he has this disorder. Someone at the helm with that disorder is extremely dangerous. And the idea that he has in his own mind a Superman shirt underneath his dress shirt, and that he alone can save the world, and that he can do it in one day, and that he can do it with one arm tied behind his back. It's just absurd, but it's dangerous. And that's one of my biggest concerns about his potential return to the office.
Okay. Rohan Gunaratna, depending on the verdict, how likely is it that either side will accept it? Do you believe recounts, challenges are in the offing? Do you also believe perhaps there's going to be rhetoric on either side depending on what the outcome is, if it is indeed close?
Certainly, this is a very acrimonious election. The outcome will mobilize certain parties, especially the right-wing groups, the extremist right-wing groups in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand. All these groups are currently watching these developments, and they can become more active. They will no longer be just extremists. They will go into violence too. So I think that it is so important to maintain security and stability of the United States during this period, and for the international security and intelligence community to monitor how the right-wing extremism will rise in the United States and globally. Thank you.
Okay, I can see a breaking input flashing there on our screens that former President Clinton has also campaigned for Harris. What kind of impact will that make or not? We'll perhaps know tomorrow. Professor Nalapat, all the star campaigners going out now further and further in the swing states. We believe former President Clinton now coming out to campaign for Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, Donald Trump will be holding rallies in two of the key swing states, two mega rallies. How important is this last-minute blitz going to be for either side?
Well, actually, Uday, you may be surprised, I may be surprised, and you may have what our friends are calling a blowout election, with one of the candidates getting around 300 plus electoral votes, or close to that. Much more than 270, maybe 20 more than 272. But the fact is, if that happens, I quite agree with Daniel Wagner, this should be accepted. They should not fight it, because it's time to put this division, behind the United States, the people of the United States, and it's time to have faith in the electoral process overall, because the electoral process is the bedrock of democracy. And if you don't have faith in the electoral process, well, the question is, what is going to be its impact on the way democracy functions in your country? America is way too big a country, so is India, by the way too important a country for the process, frankly, to be vitiated in any manner. And I think if there is a blowout election, and it may happen, elections that were blowouts in the polls became close, and vice versa. If that happens, whoever loses should accept the result gracefully. Thank you, Uday.
But how likely is that going to be, Ambassador Seth, particularly if it's a close election? Do you also believe that this could, take days before there is some sort of final conclusion?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Yes, I think yes, it might take some days. The whole process is such.
And I'd like you also, since you've seen the Indian election also very, very closely, just talk about how different it is from the way the US election has panned out with these illegal votes that Professor Nalapat cited, and also, of course, Donald Trump, crying foul. Also others questioning how this early system works, with certain states having different rules to others. In fact, certain states also have different rules within their counties.
Absolutely. I think it's very complicated, and there's lack of clarity, and maybe there was some reason earlier, I think, but in today's open era, I should say, where the news, where everything is transparent, I think it's important that everybody should know what is happening where and what is exactly the process. I think because of this complicated methodology which they have adopted, It may have been suitable years ago. I'm not sure it continues to be suitable today, but it is for the American people to decide. And there's also been talk about, when we mentioned about the illegal voters, about having an identity card, a voter identity card to ensure that, and former President Trump has spoken about that, saying, why can't we have identity cards? Why are the Democrats against it? So, this kind of issue will be there, and unless the parties concerned, all concerned, that the Senate and the House all decide that, and the people decide that there needs to be change to make it more transparent and not let this uncertainty. Of course, it's going to be only in, next January that the next new president will take office. But the fact that it's such a long, drawn-out process, after voting is finished, I think counting should be like in India, as you're well aware, where we have a very robust election voting system. I think and quick, results are out, and everybody and representatives of all parties are there while the counting is on. So I think that kind of, they're also, I'm sure they are there even when the counting is going on in the US. But it has to be a little more, less opaque, let me put it, from currently what it is, and giving the swing states and the electoral college so much of weightage. I don't know.
Do you believe
how,
that's something? Do you believe that's something that's in the offing, Bradley Thayer? This dead heat, this close election going down to the wire, possibly these challenges on either side?
I think without question that if it is close election, there will be challenges. I think it's important if your audience might pay attention to Virginia and New Hampshire. If they are looking like going for Trump, then there are key indications that it may be an overwhelming Trump victory, in addition to Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Michigan, which are in the eastern time zone of the United States and where results might be known first. But as my colleagues have stressed, that the process will be a long one, as the secretaries of state of the state of Michigan and of Arizona have said, that is those individuals tasked with running the election and counting, have said that it will be a long process. As we expect in Nevada, it will be as well. My colleagues have also stressed that there will be legal challenges, and if it is close, then I think that is a certainty. There are deadlines, however, December 11th, December 17th, and January 6th are key deadlines where there are points. And the court system, of course, the Supreme Court, it's quite likely if there are legal challenges that the Supreme Court will intervene with dispatch in these courses, as we saw in the election of 2000 between Al Gore, Vice President Al Gore, and George W. Bush. So we should expect that if it is close, results will take some time to know, days to know, and we should expect that the process will enter a new stage, if you will, of the competition between the respective parties. However, there are firm deadlines imposed by the Electoral College system that I'm sure the court system is well aware of and will ensure that issues are adjudicated by those dates. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Since we have extended the duration of this telecast, I'd like you to come back in. Ambassador Seth, I interrupted you when you were making that point. Please do go ahead, elaborate. Ambassador Manju? Ambassador Manju Seth, can you hear me? Okay, I think we've lost Ambassador Manju Seth there. Okay, let me quickly, go back across to Professor Madhav Nalapath on, of course, also the aspect, Professor Nalapath, of these, early voters. It's been a record-breaking turnout this time of early voters that have come out to vote. In fact, that's something that, of course, is seen often, but this time the figure of early voters has been truly historic. It's broken records, is what US media outlets are saying. What do you make of that, and what bearing is that likely to have on the upcoming result?
Well, it depends on whom the voter has voted for, and you can't be certain of that until the votes are fully counted. And if it's a close contest, as our friends have said, it may take days and days. But having said that, it could also be a blowout election. And in that case, there's no question of any deadline not being met. My point is that then a party should not attempt the impossible of challenging a blowout election because he or she does not like the opposing candidate or the opposing party. So I think in that situation, I think it's incumbent for both the big parties, Democratic and Republican, to accept the result gracefully and rather than create a problem which has to be resolved in the Supreme Court or in the House of Representatives. Certainly, that also will go to the Supreme Court. But I think if it's a blowout election, I think it should be gracefully accepted by both sides. If it's a narrow election with a few thousand votes making all the difference, obviously it's going to be challenged. Like Al Gore, for example, he gracefully withdrew at the last moment, even though it was a very close election, because they were nearing the deadline. But quite frankly, I mean, he had a quite strong case where the election was concerned, but in the interest of American democracy, he withdrew. So I think Al Gore set a very good example for honoring the process and for ensuring strength and stability in American democracy. We are seeing some perception of shakiness there, and I hope, as a friend of the United States for a very long time, that perception dissipates and that Americans accept the result gracefully if the result is overwhelmingly in favor of one candidate or the other and not a very close result. Thank you.
As well, Ambassador Bhashpati Mukherjee, former diplomat, who I believe has also joined the broadcast now. Ambassador Mukherjee, as far as, of course, the election is concerned in the United States of America, the polls, of course, say it's extremely close. It's boiling down to the swing states. What do you believe could ultimately determine the issues, the factors, the outcome, and which, according to you right now, is looking like the most unpredictable swing state?
Actually, it is an unpredictable election because the voter in US is highly polarized. But if you ask me about the issues which are of importance to all, I would put the state of the economy and the whole issue of immigration, illegal immigration, as two issues which concern Americans across the political divide. It counts for much more than the debate for and against abortion, where it is also forgotten that there are a large number of women voters who are against abortion. That may be surprising for an Indian audience because we believe that abortion here is almost like a fundamental right for women, given the state of violence against women in India, etc. But in United States, there are large lobbies of women who do not favor abortion. So their votes will not go to Kamala Harris, it will go to Trump. Similarly, there are some states, swing states, where she seems to have improved her position, etc. But given the fact that in the United States, you can win the popular vote but still lose the election, I would say that everything depends on the Electoral College. As far as the popular vote is concerned, in my perspective, the greatest handicap of the incumbent Vice President, Mrs. Kamala Harris, is that she is burdened with the negativity around President Biden's presidency, where she is being held accountable, maybe sometimes unfairly, on issues where the present president is perceived by some not to have done well. That also includes, for instance, highly polarizing issues like should the United States continue to fund the Ukraine war the way it is, etc. And the position with regard to Israel and its conflict in Gaza and against and in Lebanon, because there is a very strong Jewish lobby which funds both parties, and the Biden administration, rightly or wrongly, has been perceived to be much more tough on Israel than the Republicans. So there again, it's really, as you rightly pointed out, Uday, an election that is going to go down to the wire.
Yes.
But there are also conflicting reports that it could even be an easy win for one side or the other. It's because the kind of assessments that are coming, some are showing a deadlocked or a very tight election. Others are showing something quite different. So it's a little bit like even in India, where there are so many what we call in English election pundits.
Absolutely.
And sometimes what they say is correct, but sometimes what they say is totally wrong. So I think we really need to keep this one, boiling, as they say, until the results start coming in.
Well, we are less than 24 hours away from the election, from, of course, voting day. Can Kamala Harris pull off a historic win? Will the Trump card stamp triumphant? The voters shall decide how America's governance will unfold for the next 4 years. All eyes, of course, are on them for the big day of the 5th of November. The voice of the voters in the US is all that matters now. In fact, let's take a look at those voices.
Oh, I mean, our economy was better when Trump was in office. Everything was better. But I want our open borders, biggest mistake ever. But if you look at our economy, look at the grocery prices, I mean, all of it. People can't afford to live. My daughter can't afford to buy a house right now because the interest rates are super high.
Yeah, honestly, I think whoever wins, I think there's going to be some backlash either way. I think if Trump wins, there's going to be some chaos, there's going to be some riots, and obviously we saw, I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy behind what happened on January 6th 4 years ago, but I could potentially see some Trump supporters being pretty upset about what could happen if Harris wins as well. So,
North Carolina, it's going to come down to the wire, so we're here to support the first colored woman to become president in our country. I'm beyond excited.
Democratic Party in general has been running on a lot of empty promises. I know that if the Democrats wanted to control the main spear of the liberal front, they would do that. They would align fully with the liberal policies. They wouldn't have almost a conservative stance on Palestine. They wouldn't have no response to abortion. They wouldn't be so ticky-tacky with racial issues. If they were to commit to actually being the social justice party that they're painted as, I think they would be able to sway more voters in. It wouldn't be no need for a Green Party.
I'll be voting against the abortion thing just because, I'm pro-life. I believe in the sanctity of life. I believe in exceptions, much like President Trump. But I do think that we need to protect life whenever we can.
And I think that the abortion measure being on the ballot could hypothetically help the Democratic Party because it is an issue that people feel passionately about. They want women to have the right to choose. They want the freedom from government interference.
All right, Alexander Slater, in fact, is also with us now, former Managing Director, US-India Business Council. Let me quickly draw you in here, Alexander. On, of course, this US election, which has really gone down to the wire. Is it a different election from others that you've seen in the recent past? Are issues dominating this time, or is it polarized? Do you believe emotion is weighing heavier on voters' minds? What's your take, Alexander, and how close do you believe it is on ground?
Well, thanks so much for having me on today. I really appreciate being here. Having spent a significant time in India, and the United States, I think it's important to be able to share across the bilateral relationship the state of things in both countries. On the issue of the election, I think it's actually quite close. I think the pollsters have it right here, and that you do have a deeply divided electorate, at least in the swing states. There really are 7 states that are going to hold the key to this election, and probably really just 3. Being Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. If they go Democratic, as they traditionally do, it seems very likely that we'll have a President Harris at the end of the day, Tuesday. But of course, the polls suggest that in those states, it's a very, very close election, and that if there's going to be any defections from those, the traditional voting patterns of those states, then it might go the other way. So at least in terms of the states that are the swing states, it's quite close. In terms of the popular vote, I don't think it will be close. It seems like that Vice President Harris has a lead in the popular vote. If you look back historically in the last 8 elections in the United States, the Republicans have only won the popular vote once, and that's in 2004 with George W. Bush. Even in the prior victories, George W. Bush in 2000, and then President Trump in 2016, they both lost the popular votes. And so the popular vote tends to go Democratic in recent history. And so I think we'll see that pattern repeat again. But again, swing states that really matter due to the Electoral College. In terms of what's dominating, I think it's a combination of things and depends on what part of the electorate you look at. The United States is a very large country, but much like India, although not as large as India. And so for different sectors of the voters, different segments of the voters, different issues matter. I do think, when we heard from some of the voters that you all interviewed, some of the key issues did come up. Inflation and cost of living through the pandemic has been a significant issue this time around, even as inflation in the United States has largely abated. There has been a significant run-up in prices over the last 4 or 5 years, and people still have sticker shock when they go to the grocery store, for example. Then there is a large segment of the population that remains quite animated over the Supreme Court decision to end the national right to abortion. And so have a state-by-state approach, which is resulting in significant restrictions on the rights of women to have abortions. And that has made a large segment of the population become quite engaged in a way that they may not have been before. We see this a bit in the early voting, or at least, in the polls that suggest that women voters, there's a huge gender gap, at least in the voting patterns here, where women largely in favor of Vice President Harris, and then you have some men, more men that are supporting President Trump. And so I think those are some of the issues that are dominating here.
Absolutely. Let me get you in here now, Professor Saurabh, fellow JNU, into the discussion. Professor Saurabh, now, as far as, of course, this election is concerned, what is the Indian viewpoint on it? Are we going to see a change in India-US relationship post this verdict? Is there going to be a reset? What is the Indian viewpoint on this election? How should Indians be viewing this presidential poll and its possible outcomes? Professor Saurabh, can you hear me? Okay, I think we are having some connection issues with Professor Saurabh. But Adit Kothari, why don't you take that? Founder, Indic Society, I believe you've also joined us now. Before I come to you, okay, I believe there's some connection issues with Adit as well. Ambassador Mukherjee, why don't you come in here on the Indians' viewpoint, Indian viewpoint on the election? How should Indians be viewing this presidential poll in the United States of America and its eventual outcome? Will there be a reset in US-Indian relations, or will there be continuity? What's your perspective on this big pressing issue on minds of people in South Asia? Ambassador Mukherjee.
In the first instance, as a professional diplomat and coming from a democratic country like the United States, I believe that the selection of the American president depends on the will of the American people. They have the right to decide, and they will decide. As far as India is concerned, from my personal perspective, I do believe that the present incumbent vice president comes with a lot of baggage vis-a-vis India. Being of Indian origin is not necessarily, how do I put it delicately, is not necessarily a strong point as far as the India-US strategic partnership is concerned. In fact, on the contrary, as we've seen with Rishi Sunak in UK, for instance, we've had much stronger and better relationships with British prime ministers who are completely divorced from Indian origin, totally 100% Brit. So it's not a symbiotic thing that because you're of Indian origin, you're going to have a great relationship. On the contrary, you'll be watched, your pronouncements will be watched, you will be much more careful about what you say about India. You will not have that handicap if you don't have an Indian connection. That's my first point. Secondly, as far as Kamala Harris is concerned, she will also be burdened with some of the negativity vis-a-vis India emanating from the middle and lower levels of the US State Department that we've witnessed, especially in the last few months. A negativity emanating from the Biden presidency, which clearly has not been able to ensure that the US State Department gives out a unified message from its top to the bottom level with regard to the importance of the India-US strategic partnership for both countries. She will be burdened with that perception, which is a perception which we in India have, particularly professional diplomats, politicians, etc. That perception does not hold true for President Trump. From that perspective, and given the fact that during the Trump presidency, we had a pretty easy ride as far as the strategic partnership was concerned, and because traditionally Republicans have a pragmatic business approach vis-a-vis the India-US partnership, as opposed to Democrats who bring in a lot of messy stuff which causes conflict. For instance, state of the human rights, condition status of women in India, the caste system, child labor, and various other issues, bringing in conditionalities into trade agreements, etc. These do not augur well for a strategic partnership that is supposed to set the tone for both countries as we move on. Yes. And as it becomes a different country by 2040.
Point taken. I believe Adit Kothari has also joined us back now, founder Indic Society. Adit Kothari, as far as, of course, now the X factors are concerned, what are those going to be? It's boiling down to the swing states. What will sway those states? What's the X factor going to be? Which state out of those, crucial ones are you looking at as perhaps the most unpredictable, which could influence the outcome?
Just taking the narrative ahead from where Alexander dropped it, he mentioned 3 states. I'm going to boil it down to one, Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania is going to be the key one to look out for. From a deciding factor perspective, I think President Trump has used 2 of the I's in his election narrative, which is basically inflation and immigration. And that seems to have resonated massively with the electorate that he's specifically targeting. If I put them down, it's basically the so-called union workers, the non-college graduates, the have-nots, people who feel that, they are worse off, rather they've been left worse off over the course of the last 4 years when it comes to, them being part of the economic churning and the economic process. And they basically believe that they were better off between 2016 and 2020. So all of these issues, seems to resonate with that sort of electorate. And I think they're going to be the key sort of voters. Pennsylvania is a bit of a tricky one because it does have a significant amount of Puerto Rican voter base as well. And I don't think, whoever's behind the Trump strategy thought about it much when they platformed Tony Hinchcliffe during the New York rally. I mean, every word was said in poor taste, and it demonstrated bad judgment not only on his part but also in terms of on the part of the strategy team that are basically working for Trump at this point. So could that be basically one of the issues that the Pennsylvanian voters might be ticked about? That only time will basically tell. But so I just wanted to add one dimension.
Close eye on. Yes. Okay. We've run out of time. I'm afraid on this telecast. My thanks to all of our guests for joining us for your perspectives on the US elections. Taking a break. Thanks to our viewers for being with us.
को पावर्ड बाय policybazaar.com। हर फैमिली होगी इंश्योर्ड। अगर आप बनना चाहते हैं एंकर या फिर आप में है जुनून एक तेज तर्रार न्यूज रिपोर्टर बनने का, तो आप ज्वाइन करें ITV और इंडिया न्यूज Newsx का मीडिया स्कूल। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का कोर्स आपको मौका देता है देश के दिग्गज एंकर्स के साथ काम करने का। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल में आप बेहद नजदीकी से देख पाएंगे किस तरह से ITV नेटवर्क के दिग्गज पत्रकारों की टीम दिन रात खबरों पर काम करती है। इस कोर्स के दौरान आप सीखेंगे एंकरिंग की एक एक बारीकी उन एंकर्स के साथ जो देश को रखते हैं हर खबर से बाखबर। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का ये कोर्स आपके एंकरिंग स्किल्स को करेगा इतना सशक्त, मजबूत, जिससे आप बनेंगे पत्रकारिता की दुनिया का वो